Hey friends! Glad you're here at Arcane Paradox. We've cooked up something special. What if Fleur sends 27 mate-blocking curses on Harry and French ministry declared war on Britain? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The Weight of 27. The champion's tent smelled like nervousness. It was an odd thing to notice, but Harry had spent enough time around frightened people to recognize the particular cocktail of too much cologne and not enough sleep that filled the striped canvas enclosure behind the Hogwarts stands. Victor Crumb stood in the corner with his arms crossed, jaw set, radiating the specific brand of controlled tension that came from someone who'd been performing under pressure since he was 12. Cedric Diggory kept straightening his robes, checking the same non-existent wrinkle for the fourth time. Even the noise from outside, thousands of students packed into temporary stands, the low roar of anticipation that had been building since breakfast, seemed to press against the tent walls like something physical. Harry sat on a wooden folding chair that was slightly too short for him and watched the entrance flap and tried not to think about dragons. He was not entirely successful. The problem with knowing a dragon was waiting for you was that your brain, no matter how firmly you instructed it otherwise, kept returning to the subject with the enthusiasm of a dog with a particularly interesting bone. Harry knew the specifics of all four breeds now. He knew their wingspans, their fire temperatures, their blind spots and their territorial instincts. He'd spent 3 nights memorizing information that Hermione had practically thrown at him while Ron pretended none of it was happening, and still, sitting in this tent with the distant sounds of a crowd settling into their seats, all that useful knowledge had compressed itself into one simple, pounding thought. Dragon. You look like you are going to be sick. He looked up. Fleur Delacour had crossed the tent without him noticing, which said something unflattering about his situational awareness. She was dressed for competition, deep blue robes with bows baton silver at the collar, her platinum hair pulled back into something elegant and practical at the same time, and she was looking at him with an expression that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite amusement but occupied some precise point between both. I'm fine, Harry said, with all the conviction of someone who was absolutely not fine. Fleur raised one eyebrow. It was a remarkably eloquent gesture. She pulled up the folding chair across from him and sat down, which Harry hadn't expected. In the 3 weeks since the goblet had spat his name out, most of the Beauxbatons contingent had treated him with the particular brand of dismissal reserved for children who'd wandered into adult conversations. Not cruel, exactly. Just absent. The Hungarian horntail, she said conversationally, has a blind spot of approximately 40 degrees behind the left shoulder. But you must approach low, because they sweep with the tail first before they turn. Harry stared at her. You know about the dragons? My headmistress made inquiries. She said it simply, without apology. I know what I am facing. I thought perhaps you did not. I know, he said. I found out. Hagrid showed me. Something moved in her expression. Not pity, exactly. More like recalibration. Good, she said, and she looked like she meant it. She extended her hand then, not for a handshake, just an odd, instinctive gesture, the kind that looks like it belongs to a different conversation. We are the youngest, she said. Perhaps that means something. Harry wasn't sure what it meant, exactly, but he took her hand. Later, much later, he would think about what happened in that moment and realize he hadn't had the vocabulary to describe it at the time. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't quite a feeling either, at least not the way he understood feelings. It was more like standing in a room where someone had just extinguished every light, and in the sudden darkness becoming aware, with horrible clarity, of how many walls there were. He felt her hand go rigid in his. Not a flinch. Fleur Delacour didn't flinch. But every muscle in her fingers went absolutely, completely still, and when Harry looked at her face, the practiced composure had cracked, not shattered, but cracked, the way good porcelain cracks, in a single precise line from one edge to another. Her eyes had gone very wide and very blue, and she was looking at him like she'd just reached into a pond to pick up a stone and found, instead, something with teeth. What, she said quietly, and the word came out stripped of everything except the question. "What?" Harry said, confused. She didn't answer immediately. Her thumb moved, once, a small unconscious arc across the back of his hand, and he watched something move across her face that he couldn't name, a rapid internal accounting, the look of someone adding up numbers that keep coming out wrong. Then she released his hand, sat back, and the composure came back down like a curtain dropping. But her eyes were still doing that thing, still wide, still too focused on him. "Nothing," she said, and he could tell, with absolute certainty, that she was lying. Before he could say anything else, Ludo Bagman exploded into the tent with all the energy of a man who had never once in his life experienced an awkward moment, his lime-green Quidditch robes practically glowing, his voice filling every corner of the space with cheerful enthusiasm. He gathered them all together and explained the first task with the kind of delighted drama that suggested he'd been rehearsing. Harry absorbed the information, golden egg, collected from the nesting mother, full marks for style and daring, while watching Fleur from the corner of his eye. She was listening to Bagman. Her face was perfectly attentive. But her hands, folded in her lap, were pressed together too tightly, knuckles pale as bone. He went into the arena not knowing what that meant. He came out of it with a golden egg under one arm and a burn across his left shoulder that would scar, and he filed the moment away under things to think about when I'm not on fire, which was a folder that kept getting very full. The French contingent's tent, the one reserved for the Beauxbatons students and staff, separate from the main school, was positioned at the eastern edge of the Hogwarts grounds, between a stand of birch trees and the lake. It was larger than it looked from outside, pale blue and silver, and considerably warmer than the Scottish November air had any right to be. By 8 in the evening, after the scores had been announced and the crowds had dispersed and dinner had been served and cleared in the great hall, the lights in that tent had not gone out. Fleur sat at the small writing desk in her private compartment, a perk of being a champion that she had previously appreciated for the quiet and now appreciated for the privacy, and stared at the parchment in front of her. She'd written 3 lines and crossed each one out. The difficulty wasn't finding the words. The difficulty was accepting what the words needed to say. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose and thought about what she'd felt. 27. She'd counted twice, standing in the arena watching a 14-year-old boy with a borrowed broomstick outweed a nesting dragon, and each time she'd reached the same number. 27 distinct magical workings, layered over each other like sediment, some so old they'd calcified into the bedrock of his magical signature and some alarmingly recent, all of them designed, not accidentally, not as side effects, but designed, to interfere with the same specific thing. The mate bond. She thought about how to explain this to someone who hadn't grown up knowing what it was. Her mother had described it once as the difference between a candle and the sun, both made light, both had warmth, both were real, but one of them was a diminished version of the other. Vila could feel the bond the way you could feel heat from a fire across a room, not just warmth but direction, not just presence but potential. And when that potential was suppressed, blocked, deliberately buried under layers of interference, she'd felt that too, once, in her grandmother's stories. In the old histories. The Accord de Lion existed precisely because someone had tried it before. She picked up the quill. Grandmere, she wrote, and then stopped, and thought, and began again. Grandmere, I need you to read this carefully and not make any decisions until you've finished the whole letter. I have found something, and I need you to tell me if I've counted wrong. I need you to tell me I've counted wrong. She wrote for 40 minutes. When she finished, she folded the parchment, sealed it with her family's wax, and went to find the Beauxbatons Olery. The owl she chose was the fastest they had, a small, fierce peregrine cross that her grandmother had sent with the delegation for exactly this kind of emergency. It seemed almost offended to be carrying a letter rather than a small country. She watched it disappear into the Scottish dark and stood there in the cold for a while. Somewhere across the grounds, in the Gryffindor Tower, Harry Potter was probably sleeping the deep, uncomplicated sleep of someone who'd survived a dragon and didn't yet know the rest of what was being done to him. She hoped he was sleeping. She hoped, very specifically, that he was sleeping well, because she suspected his nights were about to get significantly more complicated. She didn't sleep much herself. The response came at 4 in the morning, not by owl, which would have taken far longer, but by portkey accelerated magical missive, which meant someone in France had been awake and waiting, which meant someone in France had been expecting this, or something like it, and that thought sat in Fleur's chest like a cold stone. The letter was in her grandmother's handwriting, precise, angular, old-fashioned in the way of someone who'd learned penmanship when it was still considered a moral virtue. Ma petite, it began, which was the only soft thing in the entire letter, because what followed was 6 pages of the kind of controlled fury that Isabeau Delacour reserved for things she considered genuine crimes. She'd consulted the Accord. She'd called in a favor from the curse-breaking registry in Lyon. She'd already, and Fleur read this part twice to make sure she hadn't misunderstood, already contacted Minister Beaumont. The last paragraph read, "You will not confront the boy alone. You will not confront anyone at that school alone. You will tell Madame Maxime tonight. I will be at Hogwarts within the week. Do not let him out of your sight." Fleur set the letter down on the desk and looked at the wall for a moment. Then she got dressed, because she was not going back to sleep, and went to find Madame Maxime. Olympe Maxime was, in almost every respect, a woman built on a different scale than everyone around her. This was literally true. She stood nearly 12 feet tall and had to duck through most doorways, but it was also true in the sense that her reactions, when they came large. Fleur had seen her cry at the end of a particularly moving symphony, tears the size of small coins rolling down her enormous face with complete unself-consciousness. She'd seen her laugh at a student's joke until the windows rattled. She did not laugh now. She read the letter. She read it again. She set it down with a care that suggested what she actually wanted to do with it was throw it through a wall. 27, she said. 27, Fleur confirmed. Maxime was quiet for a long moment. Outside her window, the Hogwarts grounds were very dark, the lake a black mirror reflecting the first grey suggestions of dawn. "Some of them are old," Fleur said. "From when he was very young." "Infant-age signatures," Grandmere said, "the magical resonance suggests they were placed before his first Hogwarts letter." She paused. "Some are not old at all." "How recent?" "Within the last year." "Possibly this year." Maxime's jaw tightened. It was a subtle thing. She was not a woman who allowed her face to run ahead of her thoughts, but the muscle at the corner of her jaw went hard and stayed there. "The ministry signatures," she said. "Your grandmother mentioned, 3 of them carry official ministry marks. British ministry, not French." Fleur folded her hands together. Grandmere said, "She said the Accord de Lyon covers exactly this. The deliberate suppression of, I know what the Accord covers." Maxime stood, which meant she had to stoop slightly even inside her own private chambers, and moved to the window. Her reflection looked back at her out of the dark glass, vast and composed. "What does your grandmother intend to do?" "She's already spoken to Minister Beaumont." Maxime was quiet for a very long time. "Olympe," Fleur said, carefully. "He's 14. I know how old he is." There was something raw in the large woman's voice that Fleur hadn't expected. "I know exactly how old he is, and I know what this tournament asks of children his age, and she stopped. Steadied herself. "Has he been told?" "No. He needs to be told." "I know." Fleur paused. "I thought it should come from me." Maxime turned from the window and looked at her with an expression that was measuring without being unkind. Fleur knew that look. It was the look of someone deciding how much weight a bridge could hold. "Why you?" Maxime asked. Fleur thought about the tent. About the moment Harry had taken her hand and she'd felt the full terrible weight of 27 deliberate suppressions pressing down on a magical core that, beneath all of it, she didn't quite have words for what it was. She'd felt powerful magical signatures before. She'd grown up around a full-blooded Vila elder, which was like growing up next to a star. But what she'd felt in Harry Potter's hand, buried under all those layers, wasn't just power. It was something more specific than power. Because, she said, and then stopped, and chose different words. Because I found it. And because he will not believe it easily, and I think he will need to see it, not just be told. Maxine considered this. And can you show him? Yes, Fleur said. She pressed her fingers briefly to her own wrist, where the Quartervilla sense lived like a second heartbeat. I can show him exactly. The headmistress nodded, once, slowly, the way large objects moved in general, with gravity and deliberation. Tomorrow morning, she said. Early. Before breakfast, before the other students are moving. And Fleur, her voice caught her at the door. Be gentle with him. He is young and he has been carrying this without knowing, and that, she stopped. That is a particular kind of exhausting. Fleur paused in the doorway and thought, unexpectedly, of Harry's face in the champion's tent, that bone-deep tiredness that she'd catalogued and filed away as tournament nerves without looking any closer. It hadn't been nerves. I know, she said quietly. I'll be gentle. She found him at 7 in the morning by the lake. She hadn't expected that. She'd planned to go to the Gryffindor Tower and ask the portrait, deal with whatever suspicious fourth-year boys stood between her and her purpose, but as she crossed the grounds in the pale November light, she spotted him sitting on the bank of the lake, shoes off despite the cold, feet not quite touching the water, staring at the horntail scratch across his left forearm with the focused attention of someone trying to solve an equation. He heard her coming. She watched him register her footsteps, watched the quick internal assessment that flashed across his face, not a threat, Delacour, why is Delacour coming over here, and then the neutral expression that settled in place like a mask going on. It wasn't unfriendly. It was just practiced, automatic, the kind of blankness that came from years of being watched in the wrong ways. You came to me, he said. Yesterday. In the tent. Yes, she said, and sat down next to him on the bank without being invited, because being invited would have taken another 10 minutes. The grass was cold and slightly damp. She didn't particularly care. You're going to tell me what happened, he said. It wasn't a question. I was going to ask you first if you've ever felt wrong, she said. Not sick. Not injured. Just, like you were less than you should be. Like there was a version of yourself you kept almost reaching and never quite getting to. He was very still. The kind of still that meant she'd hit something real. Everyone feels like that, he said finally. His voice was careful. Not like this. She turned to face him properly. Harry. I am part Vila. 1/4, my mother is half, my grandmother is full-blooded. What that means, practically, is that I can feel certain kinds of magical workings the way some people can smell smoke. Not always clearly. Not every detail. But the broad shape of them. She paused. Yesterday, when I took your hand, I felt what's been done to you. He was watching her now. His green eyes behind those round glasses had gone very focused, the kind of focus that wasn't about disbelief but about the specific alertness of someone who'd learned that surprises were usually bad. Done to me, he repeated. Curse work, she said. Mate-blocking curses, specifically. In the old magical traditions, they're considered among the most serious violations possible. They target the soul bond potential, the ability to form genuine magical connections, but the effects are broader than just. She stopped herself from turning it into a lecture. Think of it like this. Your magical core, the thing that makes you you as a witch or wizard, it has a natural resonance. A natural strength. These curses don't just block connections. They drain. Slowly, consistently, over time, they pull on the core the way a hole in a boat pulls water. You can still sail. You just never sail as well as you should. Harry said nothing. But his hand, resting on his knee, had gone very tight. How many, he said. Very quiet. Very flat. She'd thought about this moment for the last 12 hours. About the kindest way to say it. 27, she said. The silence was absolute. A bird called somewhere out over the lake. The water made small gray sounds against the bank. 27, he said. Yes. He stopped. Pushed his glasses up. That can't be right. I mean, someone would have noticed. She kept her voice gentle. The reason these curses are considered a war crime, Harry, is specifically because they don't get noticed. They're designed to look like the magical baseline of the person they're cast on. Healers see what appears to be a normal, if somewhat suppressed, magical signature. They see a boy who is powerful but controlled, strong but not extraordinary, capable but not, she looked for the word. Not what he is supposed to be. She watched that land. Watched it hit the still surface of whatever calm he was managing in sync. Who, he said. The word came out scraped thin. We don't know all of them yet. Some are very old, placed when you were an infant, or very young. The magical residue has aged. A specialist could identify the signatures. She paused. 3 of them have British Ministry of Magic markers. His head came up sharply. The ministry, officially sanctioned curse work. The kind that requires a signature, a file, an authorization from someone with authority. She held his gaze. Someone signed off on this. More than once. He stood up. She hadn't expected it, he just stood, fast, the way people moved when they needed to be upright and moving and doing something rather than sitting still with a piece of information this size. He took 3 steps toward the lake and stopped, hands at his sides, and she could see the muscles in his back working, the deliberate careful breathing of someone not letting themselves react until they decided how to react. She let him have that. She stayed sitting and she waited. My shoulder healed faster than Madame Pomfrey expected, he said eventually. His voice had changed, less controlled, something rawer underneath. She kept saying I had good recovery speed. Said it was impressive. But she also, he turned around. Last year. 2nd year, actually, she said my magical stamina was lower than she'd expect for someone with my history. She made a note of it. I remember because she looked almost confused. Yes, Fleur said quietly. That's what it would look like from outside. And from inside? He crossed back toward her, and there was something different in his walk, not aggressive, but the blankness was gone. His face was doing something complicated and real. What does it feel like from inside? She thought about it honestly. From inside, I imagine it would feel like being tired in a way that sleep doesn't quite fix. Like trying very hard always, for things that should be easier. Like the gap between what you attempt and what you achieve is always slightly larger than it should be. She paused. Like you have to work twice as hard to get half as far, and everyone assumes that's just your natural level, and you start to assume it too. He sat back down. Not next to her, slightly apart, knees up, arms on his knees, looking at the lake. Something about his posture had changed, like a wire under tension that had just been given a small amount of slack. I thought I was just, he stopped. Tried again. Everyone says I'm powerful. Dumbledore says it. Hermione says it. But I've always felt like I was barely keeping up. Like I was always the one who had to work harder and still got less than everyone else expected. He looked sideways at her. I thought it was just me. It was not just you, she said. Someone made it that way deliberately. They sat in silence for a moment. What happens now? He asked. My grandmother is coming, she said. Isabeau Delacour. She's a Vila elder, she has both the ability and the authority to begin removing the curses. But it's a process, it won't be instantaneous. And before we start, we need to know who placed them, because some of them are, she hesitated. Some of the signature work is sophisticated enough that whoever placed certain curses will know the moment they're broken. They'll feel it. Harry nodded slowly, and she could see him processing this, turning it over, checking it for angles. The French ministry, he said. Is aware, yes. What does that mean, exactly? That they're aware. She looked at him steadily. There is a treaty, she said. The Accord de Lyon, 1847. It was created specifically because something like this had happened before, a deliberate magical suppression campaign targeting a bonded individual. Under the Accord, what has been done to you constitutes a formal act of magical aggression against a protected person. She paused. The French ministry has the right to respond. He stared at her. Respond how? That, she said, is what my grandmother's letter to Minister Beaumont will determine. She met his eyes. But I want you to understand something, Harry. I am not telling you this to frighten you or to make you feel like a prize being fought over. I am telling you because you have the right to know. And because, she stopped, and something shifted in her expression, something that wasn't quite professional concern anymore, something more honest. Because you took my hand and smiled at me like a boy who'd never had any help with anything, and I felt what someone has been doing to you, and I need you to understand that it was not small. What was done to you was not a small thing. Harry looked at her for a long time. The morning light was getting stronger, the lake going from gray to silver, and she could see the exact moment when he decided to accept this, not because he fully believed it yet, but because he'd learned, somewhere, that some information needed to be acted on before it was fully processed. Okay, he said. What do I do? For now. Nothing, she said. Let me talk to Madame Maxime. Let my grandmother come. And, she hesitated. I would prefer if you didn't tell Dumbledore yet. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, exactly. Something more complicated than surprise. He looked at the lake. Yeah, he said quietly, after a moment. Okay. That small agreement, Fleur thought, the fact that he hadn't needed to ask why, the fact that he'd hesitated for barely a second before nodding, told her something. Something she filed away carefully and didn't say aloud. He'd been waiting, maybe for years, for someone to tell him not to trust the plan. He'd been waiting, and he was very, very good at not showing it. She stood up and brushed the grass from her robes. Breakfast starts in 20 minutes, she said. You should eat. You look like you haven't been eating properly. He blinked at her, startled out of whatever he'd been thinking. Then, unexpectedly, just briefly, just a flash of something unguarded, he almost smiled. Do you always do this? Do what? Notice things. She looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said simply, and walked back up toward the castle. She didn't tell him the rest of what she'd felt. Not yet. It wasn't the right moment, and there was enough in what she'd already said to occupy him for days, and she was careful about this, careful with herself, she was not ready to articulate the other thing yet, the thing that had made her hand go rigid in the tent and her composure crack and sent her writing letters at midnight to her grandmother. The mate-blocking curses were the crime. She'd told him about the crime. She hadn't told him what they were blocking. That, she thought, walking through the castle doors as the first students began to appear for breakfast and the daily routine of Hogwarts reasserted itself around her like theater, that was a conversation for when the curses were coming down. When whatever was buried under 27 layers of deliberate suppression had room to breathe. She had felt it for 1 second, in the champion's tent, the real thing beneath all the interference. 1 second was enough to understand why someone had gone to this much trouble. Harry Potter, unbound, uncaged, uncursed, was going to be something that very few people in this building were prepared for. She was looking forward to it. In his office on the 7th floor, Albus Dumbledore sat at his desk with a cup of tea he'd stopped drinking 20 minutes ago and reread the brief, carefully worded note that a Beauxbatons owl had delivered at first light. It was a professional communication. Courteous, even. Madame Maxime to Headmaster Dumbledore, requesting a meeting at the earliest convenience regarding a matter of student welfare. It was the kind of note you sent when you were being very careful about what you put in writing. He set it down. Steepled his long fingers together. Looked out the window at the lake, where two figures sat on the bank, a platinum-haired girl in Beau's batons blue and a dark-haired boy in Gryffindor robes, and then looked away, back at his desk, with an expression that no one was present to see. Fawkes, on his perch, let out a single soft note, not a song, just a sound, questioning and clear. Dumbledore did not respond. He picked up a different quill, pulled a fresh sheet of parchment toward him, and began composing a letter of his own. Not to Maxime. Not to the Ministry. To someone else entirely. His handwriting was very steady. Chapter 2, The Accord de Lion. The meeting happened in Maxime's private study at 9 in the morning, and Dumbledore arrived 2 minutes early, which meant he'd been standing in the corridor composing himself before he knocked. Fleur noticed this because she'd been in the study since 8:30, sitting in one of the chairs along the wall with a cup of tea she was actually drinking, and she'd heard the footsteps stop outside the door. The pause. The measured breath. Then the knock. Maxime had noticed too, because her expression when she opened the door had the careful blankness of someone who decided in advance not to give anything away. Albus, she said, with the warm formality of two people who respected each other and were currently on opposite sides of something. Olymp. He came in with his usual unhurried ease, the long silver robes, the half-moon glasses, the particular quality of stillness he carried that made rooms feel like they'd been waiting for him. His eyes moved around the study with what looked like casual interest and was nothing of the kind. They landed on Fleur and held there for a half-second longer than was natural. Miss Delacour. I didn't realize this was a broader gathering. Fleur has relevant information, Maxime said. Please sit, Albus. He sat. He looked at neither of them with any expression that could be pinned down. He accepted the tea Maxime poured with a murmured thank you and set it on the side table and folded his hands in his lap and waited. I'll be direct, Maxime said. I would appreciate that. One of my students encountered a significant magical anomaly during the champion's briefing yesterday. In the course of a brief physical contact with one of the Hogwarts champions, she identified 27 distinct curse workings on his person. Maxime kept her voice level and informational, the voice of someone reading minutes from a meeting. Mate-blocking curses, layered over his magical core, some dating back to early childhood. Dumbledore was quiet. The quality of his quiet was interesting. It wasn't shock, Fleur was watching for shock and it wasn't there. It wasn't quite the performative calm of someone managing a surprise either. It was something more specific than both of those things, and she filed it away. That is a serious claim, he said finally. And a complex magical determination to make from a brief. My grandmother has confirmed the count, Fleur said. She hadn't planned to speak yet but the sentence was already out, flat and factual. She consulted the curse-breaking registry in Lion last night. The analysis is consistent. Dumbledore looked at her over his half-moon glasses. The look was gentle and assessing in equal measure, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis he'd known was coming. Isabeau Delacour, he said, with something that sounded almost like recognition. Almost like of course. Yes, Fleur said. She will be here within the week. I see. He picked up his tea, took a small sip, set it down. And you've told the boy? Maxime's jaw moved. Fleur said, with deliberate evenness, his name is Harry. Of course. A small nod. Have you told Harry? This morning, Fleur said. Another silence. Something was happening behind Dumbledore's eyes that she couldn't fully read, which she found genuinely irritating because she was usually very good at reading people. It wasn't the blankness of someone with nothing going on. It was the opposite, the surface stillness of deep, fast water. This will need to be handled carefully, Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm, and measured, and carried the implicit authority of someone accustomed to being the one who determined what careful looked like. Harry has been through a great deal already this year. The tournament, the pressures of his situation. A revelation of this magnitude, without proper, Albus. Maxime's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. 3 of the curse signatures carry British ministry authorizations. The room was very quiet. Faint sounds from below, students moving between classes, the distant echo of the castle's daily rhythm. Outside the window, a grey November sky pressed down on the grounds. That, Dumbledore said, after a moment, is a very significant allegation. It is a very significant fact, Maxime said. I have sent a communication to the French ministry. You should know this. I am not attempting to act without your knowledge, Albus, but I am also not. She stopped, and something genuine moved through her controlled expression, something that looked like anger and possibly grief, tightly bound. I am not going to pretend this is within the normal scope of school administration. Dumbledore set his teacup down with a small, precise sound. No, he said quietly. I don't suppose it is. He stood, unhurried as ever, and Fleur watched his hands, which were steady, completely steady, steadier perhaps than they had any right to be. I would ask that any formal ministry communications be routed through me before. No, Fleur said. Both of them looked at her. She kept her voice level but she didn't soften it. Harry is not a Hogwarts matter. He is not a British ministry matter. What was done to him falls under the Accord de Lyon, and French jurisdiction applies. Communications from the French ministry will go where the French ministry chooses to send them. She met Dumbledore's eyes directly. Including directly to Harry, if they choose. The gentle expression didn't waver. But something behind it, something very small, shifted. Like a gear turning over. Miss Delacour, he said, and his voice was still warm, still the voice of a grandfather and a headmaster and the most revered magical figure in Britain. I have known Harry since before he could walk. His well-being is, if it were, Fleur said, and she was aware this was the most direct thing she'd ever said to Albus Dumbledore and she said it anyway, he wouldn't have 27 curses on him. The silence that followed was the sharpest thing in the room. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. The warm expression didn't break. But she saw it, the hairline fracture she'd been looking for, the infinitesimal tightening around the eyes that meant she'd touched something real. He nodded, once, slowly. I hope, he said, that we can work together constructively through this process. He looked at Maxime. I'll expect to be informed of your grandmother's arrival, Fleur. He said her name like he was granting something. And I would ask, for Harry's sake, that this be handled with discretion. For Harry's sake, Maxime said, we will handle it correctly. He left with the same quiet unhurriedness with which he'd arrived. The door closed behind him without a sound. Fleur and Maxime sat in silence for a moment. He knew, Fleur said. I know, Maxime said. He wasn't surprised. Not even, I know. Maxime stood, moved to her window, looked out at nothing in particular. That doesn't tell us what he knew or how much. A man like Albus Dumbledore keeps many things in different compartments. He might have known about some of them and not others. He might have known they existed and believed they were necessary. She said the last word like it had a smell she didn't like. Fleur thought about this. She thought about the way Dumbledore had said Harry has been through a great deal in exactly the tone of someone describing a situation they'd had a hand in creating. He said handling this carefully, she said slowly. Not this is terrible or this must be investigated. Just, carefully. Maxime turned from the window. Yes, she said. I noticed that too. She looked at Fleur with something direct and trusting, the look she reserved for students she'd decided to treat as adults. Your grandmother will be the senior authority when she arrives. Until then, stay close to the boy. Not obviously. But close. Fleur nodded. She was already planning to. Harry spent his morning doing 3 things, attending potions, pretending to attend potions, and thinking. The thinking happened in the space between Professor Snape's voice and actual comprehension, which was a space Harry had perfected over 4 years. He moved his stirring rod at appropriate intervals, added ingredients with a performance of attention that apparently satisfied Snape's desire to find fault, or perhaps Snape was having an unusually uninterested day, because he swept past Harry's cauldron twice without comment, which was so unusual it was actually more distracting than being shouted at would have been. 27. He kept coming back to the number the way you came back to a word that didn't look right when you wrote it, running your eyes over it, checking it from different angles, trying to determine if the wrongness was in the word or in your expectation of the word. 27 curses on him. Since infancy, some of them. And nobody had said anything, nobody had noticed, or if they'd noticed they hadn't. He thought about Madame Pomfrey's frown, 2nd year. About the slight confusion in her professional expression when she'd noted his magical stamina levels. He thought about Dumbledore telling him, repeatedly, in various comfortable offices with various accompanying sherbet lemons, that he was brave and resilient and capable of more than he knew. He thought about how that had always felt like encouragement and now, this morning, had started to feel like something else. Like someone describing the size of a cage while standing outside it. I would prefer if you didn't tell Dumbledore yet. She hadn't needed to explain why. He hadn't needed to ask. That was the thing that was sitting lowest in his chest, heavier than the rest of it, heavier even than the number 27, the fact that when Fleur had said don't tell Dumbledore, his instinct had not been to defend Dumbledore. His instinct had been, quietly and immediately, yes, okay. Like some part of him had been waiting for someone to say it out loud. Ron dropped into the seat next to him at lunch. You're doing that thing, he said, serving himself a mountain of roast potatoes. What thing? The thing where you look like you're listening but you're actually about 1,000 miles away. Ron speared a potato. Hermione does it more gracefully, for the record. You go sort of blank. Thanks. Just noting. Ron looked sideways at him. Is it the tournament? Because the first task went well, I thought. The broomstick idea was, it's not the tournament, Harry said. Oh. Ron ate a potato. Waited with the particular patience of someone who'd known Harry since they were 11 and had learned that pressing usually made things worse and waiting usually worked. It was one of Ron's underrated qualities, he could be patient when it mattered. Harry looked at his plate. He wanted to tell Ron. He'd been telling Ron things since the first train to Hogwarts, and the habit of it was deep and comfortable. But something, the same instinct that had made him say okay to Fleur without argument, made him hold back. Not because he didn't trust Ron, but because Ron, when sufficiently alarmed, was predictable. Ron would want to tell someone. Ron's someone would be Hermione. Hermione's someone would be Dumbledore, because Hermione's faith in institutional authority, despite everything, was persistent and sincere. I'm just processing something, Harry said. I'll tell you when I've got more of it figured out. Ron looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that said I know you're holding something back and I'm deciding whether to push it, and then settled back into his food. Right, he said. Fair enough. Harry was grateful for him, and guilty about the gratitude, and he ate his lunch without tasting much of it. Fleur found him again after dinner. This time she'd sent a note, brief, Bosbaden's crested, appearing on the Gryffindor table just as pudding was being cleared, that said only come to the eastern corridor, ground floor, 9 o'clock. Bring nobody. Harry had pocketed it before Ron could read more than the crest, and made an excuse about wanting air, and slipped out at 8:55. The eastern corridor was quiet at this hour, lit by wall sconces that gave everything a warm amber tint. Fleur was already there, standing by one of the high windows that looked out over the grounds toward the lake. She'd changed out of her school robes into something plainer, dark trousers, a grey jumper, and she looked more real somehow, less like a tournament champion and more like a person. She wasn't alone. A man stood slightly behind her, early 30s, compact and sharp-eyed, with Cursebreaker's calluses on his right hand and the kind of alert stillness that meant he was someone who'd been in dangerous places and developed the habit of watching doors. He had dark hair cut practically short, a Gallic nose, and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw that had healed clean but not invisibly. Olivier Marchetti, Fleur said, by way of introduction. He is from the Lion Curse-Breaking Registry. He arrived this afternoon. Marchetti looked at Harry with direct, professional attention, not unkind but completely unsentimental, the way a doctor looked at a patient they intended to help and had no time to be delicate about. Potter, he said. His accent was thick but his English was precise. I've read the preliminary analysis the initial report your friend provided. He glanced at Fleur. I would like to take a proper reading, if you're willing. It will be uncomfortable but not painful. Harry looked at Fleur. She gave him a small nod that meant he's trustworthy. What does it involve? Harry asked. I'll need your hand. Both of them, actually. I'll be running a diagnostic sequence. It's a curse-breaking technique, standard French registry method. It will feel like pressure, possibly like heat, possibly like, he considered his words. Like something being pulled in different directions. It won't damage anything. It will give me a full map of what's there. Okay, Harry said. He held out both hands. Marchetti took them with a practice grip, thumb over pulse point on each wrist, and closed his eyes. His lips moved slightly, though no sound came out. The air around his hands seemed to thicken, and then Harry felt it. Pressure was the right word. Not pain, more like being inside something that was pressing in from all sides, like being underwater but without the water, just the compression. And then the heat, subtle and deep, moving up his arms from where Marchetti held his wrists, and then, Harry made a sound he hadn't meant to make. Not pain, but shock, the shock of suddenly being aware of something that had been there so long he'd stopped feeling it, the way you stopped feeling the weight of clothes until someone mentioned it. Something pressing on him. Many somethings pressing on him, like having your hands flattened against something without realizing you'd been pushing. I know, Marchetti said quietly, without opening his eyes. Stay still. Harry stayed still. He breathed. His jaw was tight and his hands were trembling slightly, which he couldn't stop, because the awareness was building now and it was bigger than he'd expected. 27 abstract number of a thing he couldn't feel was different from 27 actual distinct pressures, distinct suppressive forces, each one with its own weight and texture and direction, each one pressing in from a different angle on something deep and central. Done, Marchetti said, and released his hands. Harry sat down on the stone window ledge because his legs wanted to, and took several breaths. Marchetti was already moving, parchment out, quill in hand, writing rapidly with the focused energy of someone translating something complex while it was still fresh. Fleur stood close to Harry but didn't touch him, which was considerate, because he thought that if anyone touched him right now he might actually come apart at the seams. Did you feel them? She asked quietly. Yeah, Harry said. His voice was rougher than he'd expected. Yeah. All of them. I don't know how many of them. But, a lot. He stared at the floor. It felt like, he stopped. Tried to articulate something that didn't have straightforward words. Like there's a version of everything that should be slightly larger, and instead it's, he pressed his hands together, lacing the fingers. Squeezed. Fleur's expression did something he was starting to recognize, that particular tightening, the anger she kept controlled and professional, the thing underneath the composure that had nothing professional about it. Yes, she said. Exactly like that. Marchetti looked up from his parchment. 29, he said. Harry and Fleur both looked at him. The initial reading missed too, he said, without inflection, because he was a professional and professionals delivered information accurately regardless of how alarming it was. 29 total. Some of the older ones had merged at their edges. It's what happens when you layer this much work over this many years. They begin to interact. He set his quill down. I can give you the full breakdown. Please, Harry said, before Fleur could answer, because it was his body and his right and he was done being given careful portions of this. Marchetti looked at him with something that might have been approval. 11 pre-Hogwarts. Placed before your 11th birthday, all showing deep integration, these are the ones that are essentially structural at this point. They'll need to be addressed carefully and in sequence, because they've been there long enough that removing them incorrectly could cause backlash. He said this matter-of-factly, like a builder describing which load-bearing walls couldn't be knocked out. 9 that I'd place between first and third year. Variable sophistication, some are crude, these were clearly not done by the same hands as the earlier ones. And 9 more that are recent. Within the last 12 months. 9 in the last year, Harry said flatly. Yes. 3 of those carry ministry signatures, as previously identified. The others, he paused, reviewing his parchment. The others are interesting. The magical residue on them is distinctive. Not British government work. Something older, more deliberate. Continental in origin, possibly, but the technique is, he frowned. I'll need to spend more time with the analysis. Continental, Fleur said carefully. Don't speculate yet, Marchetti told her. Let me finish the analysis. He rolled his parchment. Now, removing these is a process, not an event. Your grandmother has already communicated with me about sequencing. We begin with the most recent, they're sitting on top of the others and some of them are actively interfering with your magical output right now, today. Every time you cast a spell, these 9 most recent ones are pulling against it like trying to run with someone's hand in your collar, Harry said. Marchetti looked at him. Yes. Precisely. A brief, professional nod. We can begin with one tonight, if you're willing. A single removal. The least complex of the recent 9, I want to see how your system responds before we go further. Harry looked at Fleur. She looked back at him without telling him what to decide. He liked that. He'd had so many people in his life who communicated their preferred answer through the way they presented the question. She just waited. Do it, he said. The removal of the first curse was not a small thing, though Marchetti made it look like one. He had Harry sit on the floor, the stone was more grounding than wood, he explained, and Harry was going to need grounding, and worked for approximately 7 minutes with focused precision, hands moving in patterns that Harry couldn't quite follow, murmuring in French in a low continuous stream that sounded less like spellwork and more like a surgeon narrating a procedure to keep their own hands steady. And then something lifted. It was the only word for it. Something that had been pressing down with a weight so constant that Harry had stopped registering it as a weight simply ceased to press, and the air seemed to expand, and there was a moment, very brief, very sharp, where Harry felt what he was meant to feel like, what his magical core was meant to feel like without that particular pressure, and it was, he had to put his hands on the cold stone floor and just breathe. That's one, Marchetti said, sitting back. He was watching Harry with clinical attention, checking for reactions, taking note. How are you feeling? Harry couldn't answer immediately. He was sitting with the feeling, the sudden expanded quality of everything, like a window thrown open in a room that had always been slightly stuffy. It wasn't a power surge, nothing dramatic, just the simple and staggering experience of not being pressed down in that specific way and realizing, with absolute clarity, how long he'd been pressed. Different, he managed. Marchetti wrote something down. Fleur had gone very still on the other side of the corridor, her back against the wall, watching Harry with an expression that wasn't professional in the slightest. 1 down, Marchetti said. 28 remaining. He stood, straightening his jacket. We stop here tonight. I need to assess the interaction before we remove another. Some curses stabilize others in the stack, you have to understand the architecture before you start pulling bricks. Harry nodded. He was still sitting on the floor and he had absolutely no criticism of this because standing seemed like an ambitious project. Someone will know, Fleur said to Marchetti, quietly. That one was broken. Yes, Marchetti said. If they had anything monitoring the integrity of their work, and the recent ones especially, I'd expect monitoring, they'll feel it within the hour. He looked at Harry with frank directness. Someone will know that something has changed. I don't know who, and I won't know until I've finished the signature analysis. But you should be aware. I'm aware, Harry said. He got up off the floor, because sitting on cold stone in front of two people who were trying to help him was about as undignified as he was willing to be for one evening. He was slightly unsteady but upright, which was adequate. What do we do about that? Marchetti looked at him with the same flicker of something like approval. Your job tonight is to act entirely normally, he said. Go to your dormitory. Sleep. In the morning, be Harry Potter doing ordinary things. The moment someone suspects you know what's been done to you, the situation becomes more complicated. What's my job? Fleur asked. Document everything, Marchetti said. Every interaction, every piece of unusual behavior from anyone connected to this school's administration. Dates, times, exact words. He picked up his case. I'll have a full signature analysis within 48 hours. He nodded at Harry, a nod of one professional to another, which Harry found oddly, quietly moving. Potter. He left the way he'd come, quickly and without ceremony. Fleur and Harry were alone in the corridor. One, Harry said. One, she confirmed. 28 left. Yes. He looked at her. In the amber light of the wall sconces she looked less like a tournament champion and less like a creature out of myth, which was how most people at Hogwarts seemed to see her, he'd noticed, which said more about them than about her, and more like someone who'd chosen to do a difficult thing because it was the right thing. Which was something Harry found he recognized. Thank you, he said. And because he was not, fundamentally, someone who handled gratitude gracefully, he said it quickly and looked away. For telling me. For all of this. You didn't have to. I found it, she said simply. That is enough of a reason. He nodded. He started toward the staircase. Harry. He stopped. She was still standing by the window, and the light caught her face at an angle, and her expression was doing the thing he couldn't fully name yet, not professional, not performed, just very direct and very human. How do you feel? Not about the curses. Just, right now. How do you feel? He thought about it honestly. Like something I didn't know was there just stopped, he said. And now I can feel where it was. She nodded slowly. That is going to be the experience of each one, she said. Each removal. You will feel where they were. Some of them will be, some of them are old, Harry. When the old ones come down, it'll be worse, he said. It will be bigger, she said. Not necessarily worse. Just bigger. He processed this. Then, okay, he said, because okay was apparently the word he kept reaching for when things were enormous and he didn't have anything more sophisticated. She almost smiled. He thought she almost smiled, which was not nothing. He went back to Gryffindor Tower, climbed through the portrait hole, exchanged the minimum necessary words with Ron, and lay in his bed in the dark and stared at the curtains of his four-poster. He felt different. Just slightly, just 1/29th of different, but it was there. A small patch of himself that had room to breathe. He thought about what 29 patches of breathing might feel like. He slept better than he had in months, which told him things he hadn't asked to know. In the morning, a letter arrived addressed to Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, from the French Ministry of Magical Affairs, Office of the Senior Undersecretary for International Magical Law. It was 6 pages long, written in formal diplomatic French with an official English translation attached. The ministry owl that delivered it was large, official-crested, and clearly not accustomed to being made to wait, because it refused to leave until a clerk had signed for receipt. Fudge read the first page, then the second, then set it down and picked it up and read the first page again. "Get me Dumbledore," he said to the clerk, in the voice of a man whose morning had just taken a turn he'd had no preparation for. "Right now. Get me Dumbledore." The clerk ran. Fudge read the letter a third time. The word accord appeared 17 times. The words formal violation appeared 8 times. The phrase magical aggression against a protected person appeared 4 times, and each time it appeared it seemed to him to be in slightly larger, slightly more serious ink. On the last page, over the signature of Minister Etienne Beaumont and the seal of the French Ministry of Magic, was a single formal declaration. The French Republic, it said, considers the condition of the individual known as Harry James Potter to constitute a violation of the Accord de Lyon, Article 7, and reserves all rights afforded to the aggrieved party under said accord, including but not limited to the right of intervention, the right of extraction, the right of magical remediation, and in the event that the British Ministry of Magic fails to acknowledge, investigate, and provide remedy for said violation within 30 days. Of this communication, Fudge turned the page. The right of formal declaration of magical war. He sat very still for a moment. Then he said, quite quietly, "Oh no." Chapter 3, Fire over the Channel. The 30-day window was a formality, and everyone with enough political intelligence to read between the lines of diplomatic language understood that. Fudge apparently did not. He arrived at Hogwarts the following morning with Percy Weasley in tow, Percy serving his first year as a ministry junior assistant with the particular enthusiasm of someone who believed very sincerely in the importance of correct procedure, and 2 Aurors who stood by the entrance hall looking like they'd been told this was a routine visit and were beginning to suspect otherwise. Fudge had worn his best lime green bowler hat, which Harry observed from the top of the main staircase told you everything you needed to know about how seriously the minister was taking this. Harry was not supposed to be there. He'd been heading to the library when he'd heard the commotion and stopped, back against the stone wall at the top of the stairs, looking down at the entrance hall where Fudge was shaking Dumbledore's hand and talking rapidly and Percy was scribbling things on a clipboard with the frantic energy of someone who believed documentation was the solution to most problems. Completely unprecedented, Albus, and the tone of the letter was, well, I have to say it was quite aggressive, and I don't think, Cornelius. Dumbledore's voice was perfectly measured. Perfectly warm. Perfectly the voice of the wisest man in the room, and Harry, from his vantage point above, felt something cold and precise move through him at the sound of it. Let's speak privately. There are students about. They moved toward Dumbledore's office, and Harry waited until the sound of their footsteps had died away and then took the stairs 2 at a time in the opposite direction, not toward the library but toward the eastern grounds. He'd learned Fleur's schedule in the past 48 hours partly because she told him and partly because he was someone who'd survived 4 years at Hogwarts by paying attention to patterns. She had a free period from 9 to 11. She usually spent it outside, weather permitting, because she found the castle oppressively enclosed. He found her near the birch trees, sitting on a low branch with a book open in her lap that she wasn't reading. Marchetti was nearby, standing with his back to a tree trunk eating an apple and looking at nothing in particular with the alert ease of someone who was always slightly on duty. Fleur saw Harry coming and read something in his walk, because she closed the book before he reached her. "Fudge is here," Harry said. "I know," Marchetti said. "His carriage was announced at the gate 20 minutes ago." He took another bite of his apple. The French observer arrived at the same time, through the main gates on foot. "She'll be meeting with Madame Maxime this morning." Harry looked at him. "What French observer?" "The ministry sent a liaison," Fleur said. "A junior diplomat named Colette Vidal. She's been assigned to Hogwarts for the duration of the formal inquiry period." She paused. "This is standard procedure under the Accord. Once the letter is delivered, the aggrieved party has the right to place an observer in the location of the violation." "So the French ministry has someone in Hogwarts now," Harry said. "Yes. And Dumbledore knows?" "He was notified this morning, same as the letter to Fudge. The observer has the right of access under Article 9, Dumbledore cannot refuse her entry." Harry sat down on the ground near Fleur's tree and pulled his knees up, thinking. He could feel the absence of the first curse still, that small patch of expanded space in his magical core that he kept noticing the way you kept noticing a tooth that had been pulled, not pain but presence, the awareness of where something used to be. It was strange and not entirely comfortable, but he liked it. He liked it specifically because it was honest. "Fudge doesn't know what he's doing," Harry said. "No," Marchetti agreed pleasantly. "He'll try to deny it. Say the reading was inaccurate or that it doesn't fall under the accord, or, he will certainly try several things," Marchetti said. "None of them will work, because my documentation is complete and the accord's language is unambiguous. But they will take time to fail, and while they are failing," he finished his apple and tucked the core into his jacket pocket with a fastidiousness that seemed characteristic. "While they are failing, we continue the work." Harry looked up at Fleur. Last night someone noticed," she said. "Madame Maxime found a diagnostic charm on the corridor door this morning. Someone had placed a monitoring spell, looking for unusual magical activity. It had been triggered." She met his eyes steadily. "It's not a signature we recognized." "Crouch?" Harry said. He'd been thinking about Bartemius Crouch Sr., the man who looked increasingly like he was barely keeping himself together, the lurching absence from events where he should have been present. He'd been thinking about it partly because the brain he'd been given didn't stop turning over suspicious details and partly because 1/29th of his full intelligence, now operating without a specific interference, had apparently decided to start working on the tournament's underlying mechanics. "Possibly," Marchetti said, and the way he said it suggested he had thoughts on the subject he wasn't ready to share. "Harry." Fleur's voice shifted, still direct, still factual, but with something underneath it. "My grandmother arrives tomorrow." He felt the weight of that settle. He'd been thinking about Isabeau Delacour in abstract terms, the person who'd confirmed the Count, the person whose name had made Dumbledore say of course, the Vila elder who was apparently coming to Hogwarts with the authority and intention to begin dismantling 28 remaining curses on a 14-year-old boy who'd been built around them for his entire life. "Is she?" He stopped, trying to figure out what he was actually asking. "She is not frightening," Fleur said, which was probably not quite true and they both knew it. "Then, she is not frightening to people who have done nothing wrong." She paused. "She will like you." "How do you know?" "Because you held out your hands to Olivier without asking to be reassured first," she said simply. "Grandmere likes people who decide things." Isabeau Delacour did not arrive by carriage or by owl or by any of the conventional methods. She arrived by portkey at precisely 7 in the morning the following day, in the Hogwarts entrance courtyard, in the company of 2 other women who were not introduced but who moved with the particular quality of people accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any given room. Harry had gotten up early because he couldn't sleep. He'd been standing in the courtyard for 20 minutes, hands in his pockets, breathing cold air and thinking about nothing specific, when the 3 women arrived in the quiet implosion of a portkey arrival, a flash, a displacement of air, and then they were simply there. He recognized Isabeau immediately, which surprised him. He'd expected someone who looked like a more extreme version of Fleur, all platinum and silver and otherworldly. But Isabeau Delacour was small. She barely came to Harry's shoulder. Her hair was white, not silver, white, the white of deep age, pulled back with severe practicality. Her face was lined and sharp, with cheekbones that could have cut glass and eyes that were the pale gold of something that remembered being a different thing. She looked at Harry the moment she arrived. Directly, immediately, with the intensity of someone who'd been looking forward to this specific encounter. "You are smaller than I expected," she said. Her English was accented but impeccable. She sounded like someone who'd learned the language as a weapon and kept it sharp. "You're smaller than I expected," Harry said, before he'd made any conscious decision to say it. Something moved across her face. The 2 women behind her made no visible reaction, which was impressive. Fleur, who had appeared from somewhere to Harry's left approximately 3 seconds after her grandmother's arrival, made a sound that was definitely not a laugh but was adjacent to one. "Good," Isabeau said, and crossed the courtyard to him with a briskness that her size somehow made more imposing rather than less. She stopped directly in front of him and looked up. They had about 8 inches of height difference in his favor, which felt irrelevant, and put one small, dry hand flat against his sternum, directly over his heart. The diagnostic was nothing like Marchetti's. Marchetti's had been careful, systematic, built from the outside in. This was like being looked at from somewhere deep inside, like something very old and very clear had simply turned its attention on him and seen everything at once. He stood still. He didn't look away. After about 30 seconds she removed her hand and looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize, not pity, and not quite admiration, and not quite fury, but a specific combination of all three that seemed to be what happened when someone very old encountered something that should not have been allowed to happen and had to decide what to do about it. 29, she confirmed, to no one in particular. The deepest ones are structural now. They have been there since he was what, 15 months? That's when Voldemort, Harry stopped. That is when you received the scar, yes, she said crisply. The oldest curses predate the scar by approximately 6 months. They were placed while your mother was still alive. Her voice didn't soften around this. She delivered it the way a surgeon mentioned an organ, factually, because the fact mattered for what came next. Your mother would not have placed them. The magical signature is not familial. We are working on that. She stepped back, turned to Fleur, and said something swift in French. Fleur replied. Isabeau nodded once, decisively. Tonight, she said, turning back to Harry. We begin properly tonight. Olivier has the sequencing prepared. We will take 3 more, the 3 most recent of the ministry-flagged ones. This will be more significant than what you felt 2 nights ago. She looked at him with those pale gold eyes. It will also make a great deal of noise, magically speaking. Whoever has been monitoring your magical signature will feel it clearly. So we'll be flushing them out, Harry said. Among other things, she said. Yes. Harry thought about Crouch. About the figure who wore Moody's face and moved through this school with the confidence of someone who believed he had all the variables controlled. Good, Harry said. Isabeau looked at him for another moment. Fleur told me you didn't ask to be reassured, she said. No. She was right that I would like you. She turned toward the castle. Come. I need tea, and then I need to speak with this headmaster of yours, and those 2 things should happen in that order because after speaking with Dumbledore I will not want tea. I will want something significantly stronger. She walked into the castle without looking back, and the 2 silent women followed her, and Fleur fell into step beside Harry as they went after her. She likes you, Fleur said quietly. I can tell, Harry said. It's terrifying. Dumbledore received Isabeau Delacour in his office with every evidence of gracious welcome, and Isabeau received his welcome with every evidence of a woman who had been deceived by pleasant manners before and had stopped finding them interesting. Harry was not in the meeting. He knew about it secondhand, from Fleur, who had it from Madame Maxime, who had been present. What he was told was this: Isabeau had placed a full elder's diagnostic notation on the record, a formal magical document, the villa equivalent of a legal affidavit, detailing the 29 curse workings, their approximate ages, their magical signatures and categories. She'd requested that Hogwarts provide full access to Harry's medical records from the school's infirmary. She'd requested the complete log of magical diagnostics performed on Harry during his time at Hogwarts. Dumbledore had provided everything. Promptly, cooperatively, with every appearance of good faith. And? Harry asked. Fleur's expression was precise. Your infirmary records show that Madame Pomfrey flagged your magical signature as unusual in 2nd year, 3rd year, and again at the beginning of this year. She noted suppression markers each time. She paused. Each time, the notation was reviewed and then annotated as reviewed by H.M. Dumbledore, no further action required. The corridor they were standing in was empty. Harry was very glad it was empty. He reviewed them, Harry said. He saw her flags and marked them closed, Fleur said. Flat. Yes. He stood with that for a moment. 3 separate occasions. Madame Pomfrey noticing something was wrong, doing her job, flagging it for review. And Dumbledore reading the flags and writing no further action required and filing it away. He'd thought, on the lake bank, that he'd already processed the worst of what this was. He'd thought the number 29 was the hardest part. He was finding out, in increments, that the hardest parts kept revealing themselves as something larger than the previous hardest part. My grandmother has added those records to the formal case file, Fleur said. Colette Vidal is transmitting everything to Paris today. She paused. Harry, I'm fine, he said. She looked at him. I'm fine, he said again, and this time it sounded more true, because he'd done the thing he did with large difficult information, which was take it in, feel it, decide what to do with the feeling, and pick it up. Put it somewhere he could carry it. What time tonight? 10 o'clock, she said. Same corridor. Olivier will be there with Grandmere. He nodded. He started to walk away, and then stopped. She knew, he said. Madame Pomfrey, I mean. She didn't know what she was seeing, but she knew something was wrong. Yes. And she kept flagging it. He said this slowly, working through something. Every year. She didn't stop flagging it just because someone told her no further action was required. He thought about this. About the small Scottish woman with her efficient manner and her exasperated sighs and her insistence that he eat and sleep and stop getting himself injured. She kept doing her job. Fleur was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. She did. He filed that away too, in a different category. The formal escalation from the French ministry arrived that afternoon. Not a letter this time. A representative. Senior Undersecretary Marc-Hélène Fontenot arrived through the school's Fleur network at 2 o'clock with the brisk authority of a woman who'd navigated international magical law for 20 years and had no patience for obstruction. She was tall, dark-haired, impeccably dressed in the French ministry's midnight blue, and she brought with her 2 legal advocates and a sealed document case that made the castle's magical wards flicker slightly when she carried it through the doors, which was how you knew the document case was doing something more than holding documents. She met with Fudge, who had stayed overnight in Hogsmeade and arrived back at Hogwarts at noon looking like he hadn't slept. The meeting was in the Great Hall, neutral ground, Fontenot had specified, which meant not Dumbledore's office and not a ministry-designated space, and it lasted 3 hours, which Harry knew because Ron and Hermione found him at the end of it, and Hermione, who had somehow acquired second-hand information through a Hufflepuff fourth year whose father worked at the ministry, began talking before she'd fully sat down. The French ministry is invoking Article 7 in full, she said. Not just the investigation clause, the full article. They're citing the 3 ministry-authorized curses as evidence of state-level involvement, and they're demanding that Britain either identify and prosecute whoever signed those authorizations within 30 days or face a formal war declaration, Harry said. Hermione stopped. Looked at him. You knew about this. Some of it. Her eyes narrowed in a way that meant she was recalibrating rapidly, which was generally a sign of intelligence but could also be a sign of imminent interrogation. How much of it? Hermione, Ron said, with the patient tone of someone managing 2 situations at once. Perhaps let him. It's fine, Harry said. Look, sit down. Both of you. He waited until they had. They were in a corner of the library, tucked behind a shelf of ancient runes references, which Hermione had specifically chosen for its privacy. He appreciated the choice. You're going to hear things. Probably from multiple directions. I need you to hear it from me first. He told them. Not everything, not the specific details of Marchetti's diagnostic, not the names that had come up in signature analysis, not the meeting planned for tonight. But the facts, the curse work, the number, the ages of some of the workings, the ministry signatures. The infirmary records with Dumbledore's annotations. Ron was very still by the end of it. The kind of still that on Ron meant something was happening underneath that he was holding very carefully in place. His ears had gone red, which was Ron's tell. The ears went red first, before anything else, and the redder they went the angrier he actually was. Hermione had gone through 3 visible phases: shock, rapid analytical processing, and a kind of fixed quiet that was what happened when she encountered something that her framework for the world did not have a place for. Dumbledore reviewed the infirmary flags, she said. Yes. And closed them without action. 3 times. Yes. She was quiet. Beside her, Ron's ears were approximately the color of a fire truck. Hermione, Harry said gently, because he could see what this cost her, the specific pain of someone whose trust in a system was fracturing. I know this is, I'm fine, she said, which was the least true thing she'd said in 4 years but which he understood, because fine sometimes meant I need a moment to reorganize everything I believe and I'll tell you when I've done it. She pressed her lips together. What do you need from us? That was Hermione. Straight through the emotional shock to the practical question, because practical questions were what she knew how to answer. Normality, Harry said. For now. Act normally. Don't treat Dumbledore differently. Don't, he paused. Don't tell anyone what you know until I say it's okay. Ron looked at him. The ears were still red. You're not going to ask us to stay out of it, are you? No, Harry said. I know better than that. Something in Ron's jaw unclenched. What's going on tonight? Hermione asked, which was impressive detective work based on essentially nothing, and which reminded Harry why he'd been trusting her with things for 4 years. Something important, he said. Can we help? He thought about it. Not tonight. But, I might need someone outside this situation to research the Accord de Lion. The full text, not just the summary. There's going to be a 30-day window where Fudge's team will try every legal angle they have to avoid compliance, and knowing the Accord better than they do, I'll have a summary by tomorrow morning, Hermione said, with the particular crisp decisiveness of someone who has just been given a research project, which was as close as Hermione got to visibly brightening. Thank you, Harry said. He meant it. He meant it in the specific way you meant it when people didn't need explaining, when you didn't have to justify why you were trusting them with something dangerous, when they just said yes, and what do you need? That night the removal of 3 curses was something Harry was not, afterward, able to describe to Hermione's satisfaction despite her careful questioning, because the experience didn't have straightforward language. It happened sequentially, Isabeau and Marchetti working together with the efficient complementarity of 2 people who'd collaborated before, and each removal was different. The first was quick and sharp, like a splinter pulled from skin, a brief bright pain and then nothing, then the expanded space sensation that he was getting better at recognizing but not better at describing. The second took longer, 12 minutes of sustained work, Isabeau's hands moving in overlapping patterns, Harry sitting very still with his eyes open because closing them made the pressure worse, and when it lifted something happened that Harry hadn't expected. He felt angry. Not about the curse specifically. Not even, right at that moment, about who had placed it. Just angry in a clean, physical way, the way he sometimes felt during Quidditch when everything was working and he was moving fast and his whole body was doing exactly what it was built to do. Angry like fuel. Isabeau paused and looked at him when she felt it, and something moved across her face that was not alarm. Yes, she said quietly. That is correct. The third removal was the one that left him flat on his back on the corridor floor staring at the ceiling for approximately 2 minutes while Marchetti monitored his pulse and Fleur sat beside him not touching him but close, warm, present in the peripheral way that you felt people who were steady. When he sat up, she handed him a glass of water from somewhere without comment. He drank it. Sat there. Felt 3 more patches of expanded space in his magical core, 3 more places that were no longer pressed, and thought about the fact that 26 remained. Someone is going to notice, he said. Tonight. Yes, Isabeau said. She was writing in her record book, quick precise strokes. We have a monitoring ward on the corridor. We will know if, the ward flared. It didn't make a sound, it was a visual alert, a small prism-shaped ward stone on the floor near the corridor's entrance that went from clear to deep red, but everyone saw it, and everyone was on their feet in approximately the same second. Not approaching, Marchetti said, reading the ward's secondary indicators. Stationary. Something triggered from a distance. Someone performed a diagnostic check on, he stopped. His face went careful and still in the way of someone receiving a result they weren't expecting. On the whole school. Someone just ran a diagnostic sweep of the entire castle. Isabeau straightened. Her pale gold eyes had gone sharp as struck flint. Who has access to that kind of spell? Harry asked. Nobody answered immediately, which was an answer of its own. That spell, Marchetti said, slowly, is a headmaster-level castle access. The Hogwarts Charter allows the sitting headmaster to run a full magical sweep of the grounds and all inhabitants at any time. He looked at Isabeau. It's Dumbledore. He checked, Harry said. He felt the curses come down and he ran a sweep to see how many. He's counting them, Fleur said. He's tracking how many are left. The corridor was very quiet. Harry felt the anger again, the clean physical kind, the one that felt like fuel rather than the kind that just made your hands shake. He stood up all the way, and he was steady, steadier than he'd been 3 days ago, steadier in a way that wasn't dramatic or sudden but was simply the result of 4 pieces of suppression being gone. Good, he said. Let him count. Isabeau looked at him with those pale gold eyes, and this time the expression was unmistakable. Pride. The next morning's prophet led with the French ministry's formal communiqué. Someone had leaked it, almost certainly from the British ministry side, almost certainly either Fudge's office or one of his aides, almost certainly by accident because Fudge's team had a consistent pattern of underestimating what counted as sensitive information. The headline read, French ministry threatens war over Potter boy, full details inside. Hermione brought it to breakfast and set it on the table between Harry and Ron without comment. The Great Hall was running at an elevated noise level, which was what happened when the prophet ran a front-page story involving a student currently eating breakfast 20 feet away from the place it was being read. Harry ate his porridge and did not look up. It says, Ron read, in a low voice, the French Ministry of Magic has issued a formal declaration of intent under the Accord de Lyon, a little-known magical treaty from 1847, citing alleged curse work performed on Harry Potter, 14, currently a Hogwarts student. The British Ministry of Magic has described the claims as unfounded and the French response as disproportionate. He paused. Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge declined to comment on specific allegations, saying only that he expected the matter to be resolved promptly and without incident. He set the paper down. That last part sounds made up. It does, Hermione agreed, and she was already 3 pages deeper into the edition, cross-referencing something. The Beauxbatons table across the hall, the temporary long table that had been added for the tournament and was now also apparently serving as a geopolitical flashpoint, was quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. The kind of quiet that came from a group of people who'd received a briefing and knew where they stood. Several Beauxbatons students had looked at Harry this morning with expressions ranging from sympathy to something closer to respect. Fleur was not at the table. She was standing just inside the hall's entrance in a quiet conversation with Colette Vidal, the French observer, who was taking notes on something in a small leather-bound book with practiced efficiency. Harry watched them for a moment, then looked back at his porridge. Harry, Hermione said. Yes. The prophet says, alleged. Yes. It will keep saying alleged until the ministry either admits it or the French ministry makes the documentation public. She paused. When they make it public, and they will make it public, the British public's reaction is going to be significant. I know, Harry said. Are you ready for that? He considered this honestly. He thought about being 11 and having his name in the paper for the first time. About being 12 and being called the heir of Slytherin. About being 13 and being called a liar and about being 14 and being called an attention-seeking cheat for existing in this tournament. He'd spent 4 years being what the prophet decided to make him on any given week, and the experience had been consistently terrible and consistently instructive. I've been dealing with the prophet since I was 11, he said. The difference this time is that I'm not the one doing something wrong. Ron looked at him sideways. Something shifted in Ron's expression, some residue of first task weirdness, some lingering ghost of the thing they'd gotten past, dissolving quietly. No, Ron said. You're not. The formal declaration arrived at 4 in the afternoon. Not the 30-day warning letter. The declaration itself. It arrived at both the British Ministry of Magic and simultaneously at Hogwarts, delivered by a French ministry falcon rather than an owl, significant, because owls were correspondents and falcons were envoys, and the distinction mattered in formal magical diplomacy going back to the 15th century. Colette Vidal received the Hogwarts copy personally, signed for it with her official seal, and then stood in the entrance hall and read the first page with her face completely composed and her hands completely steady, and anyone watching her compose herself in the moment of reading it would have understood that whatever was on the first page was not a surprise and was also not small. Harry was watching her from the stairs. He'd been walking past when the falcon had arrived. She looked up. Their eyes met. She was perhaps 30, efficient and precise and not unkind, and she looked at him the way you looked at someone who was simultaneously the cause, the subject, and the person most directly affected by the document in your hands. Monsieur Potter, she said, in careful English. You should perhaps speak with Madame Delacour. Isabeau or Fleur, he said. Both, she said. He went. The declaration, as Isabeau explained it to him 20 minutes later in Maxime's study, with Fleur beside her, with Marchetti in the corner, with Maxime herself standing by the window with her arms folded and her jaw set, was not, technically, a declaration of war in the conventional sense. It was a declaration of magical sovereignty interest. What that means practically, Marchetti said, because Isabeau was still reading the document's specific clauses with the concentrated attention of a lawyer, is that France is formally asserting legal interest in your well-being as a person whose magical rights have been violated. They are not declaring military action. They are declaring that Britain's authority over you is, suspended, in specific ways. Contested. Contested how? Harry asked. France is asserting the right of remedy, Isabeau said without looking up from the document. Under the accord, when a state actor has violated the soul bond protections of an individual, the aggrieved magical community, in this case, the Vila nation, acting through France, has the right to pursue remedy without requiring British ministry cooperation. She turned a page. It also means, she paused. Chose her words. The accord gives France the right to place wards on your person. Protective wards. These override any existing ministry-placed monitoring or interference. So the ministry can't, Harry stopped. Process this. The monitoring charms they have on me, will be stripped, Isabeau said, very calmly. Yes. The room was quiet. Harry thought about Moody's magical eye sweeping over him during class. He thought about the occasional prickling sensation at the back of his neck that he'd attributed to his scar and was now reframing. He thought about the trace, the underage magic tracking spell that supposedly all underage wizards had, and wondered, with a cold clarity, how much of what he'd thought was the trace was something else entirely. There's more, Fleur said. He looked at her. The declaration includes a formal request for your consent, she said. To place you under French magical protection status. It's voluntary, you have to agree. If you agree, it means France has formal standing to act on your behalf in any further violations. She paused. It also means that anyone who attempts to place additional curse work on you would be committing an act of war against France directly. He stared at her. There would be consequences, she said, and her blue eyes were very direct. Real ones. Immediate ones. Not letters, not 30-day windows. France would respond. You're asking me to, he stopped. France would go to war. For me. Specifically for me. For the principle, Isabeau said, looking up from the document finally. Which you happen to be the living example of. She looked at him over her reading glasses, small, wire-framed, which should have made her look less imposing and somehow did the opposite. You are not a cause, Harry. But the principle that no magical person should be suppressed and controlled without their knowledge or consent, that is worth defending. And you are the person in front of us. So yes. France would act. For you. He sat with the weight of that for a long moment. 26 curses left, he said. Yes. Some of them were placed by someone in this castle, he said. Maybe more than one someone. And if I accept the protection status, they'll know. Whoever placed them will know that every future attempt has France standing behind me. Yes, Isabeau said. Good, Harry said, for the second time in 2 days. Isabeau took off her reading glasses and looked at him with those pale gold eyes, and the expression on her face was the same one as the night before, steady and fierce and something close to grief for what he'd been carrying, and something entirely else for the boy who kept saying good when the world tried to make him afraid. Good, she echoed quietly. He signed the consent form at 5 o'clock, in Maxime's study, with Isabeau and Fleur and Marchetti as witnesses, and Colette Vidal notarizing it with the French ministry's official seal. He signed it with the same hand that had felt 29 suppressions 4 nights ago, and his signature was steady. By 6 o'clock that evening, the wards went up. Not visibly, French protective sovereignty wards didn't look like anything from outside. There was no dome of light, no dramatic shimmer. They settled around Harry like something changing in the air pressure, a subtle recalibration, and they were warm in a way that reminded him, distantly, of something he'd forgotten, something old and specific that lived in the back of his memory. He was walking across the grounds back toward the castle when Fleur fell into step beside him. They walked in silence for a moment. The evening had gone blue and cold, the lake reflecting a pale sky, the Beauxbatons carriage lit from inside, the Durmstrang ship a dark shape on the water. You know what Dumbledore will do now, Harry said. He will do what careful men do when a situation moves faster than their plans, Fleur said. He will adapt. I'm not afraid of him, Harry said. It came out simple and flat and true. He tested the statement against himself the way you tested ice before stepping on it, looking for cracks, and found none. I think. Not consciously. But there was, he thought about the instinct he'd had for 4 years, the reflexive deference, the way Dumbledore's disapproval had always felt like something to avoid at significant cost. There was something that made me want him to approve of how I handled things. That is a designed response, Fleur said. Not unkindly. Several of the suppressive workings target social confidence alongside magical output. The isolation effect, my grandmother calls it. Making the subject instinctively defer to authority, specifically to whichever authority has the highest frequency of contact. She paused. It makes people easier to manage. Harry walked with that. It made me easier to manage, he said. Yes. And now he felt the absence of it the way he'd been feeling all the absences. That particular instinct, the shrinking, the reflexive smallness, wasn't gone entirely, not with 26 curses remaining. But it was looser. Like a knot that had started to work itself free. Now it's going, she said. He nodded. They reached the castle doors and stopped, and the light from inside caught her face, and she was looking at the grounds rather than at him, thoughtful and composed, and he thought about the moment in the champion's tent when she'd gone still, when she'd felt 29 things pressing down on him and something had moved across her face that wasn't professional. What does it feel like? He asked. From your side. When you sensed it. She was quiet for a moment. It felt like standing next to a fire, she said, and noticing that someone had built a wall around it. Not to contain it. To keep it small. She went inside. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment, in the warm light and the cold air, and felt the French wards settle around him like something settling into place. Steady. Present. Not small. He went inside. Chapter 4, The Architecture of a Cage. The signature analysis came back on a Tuesday. Marchetti had been working for 3 days straight. Harry knew this because Fleur had told him and because he'd seen the curse breaker twice in the castle corridors at odd hours looking like someone who'd had an argument with sleep and lost, and when it was finished he called them together in Maxime's study, which had become the unofficial operations room of everything happening around Harry's situation. The study was fuller than usual. Isabeau sat in the high-backed chair near the window, her record book open, her reading glasses on. Fleur stood against the bookshelf to Harry's left. Maxime herself was at her desk. Marchetti had transfigured a section of wall into a smooth pale surface and was using it as a working board, his notation system a mixture of French curse-breaking shorthand and small drawn diagrams that looked almost like musical notation, if music were a map of deliberate harm. Sirius Black was sitting in the corner. He'd arrived by Fleur the previous evening, a head in the fireplace first, carefully, and then the rest of him when Harry had confirmed the room was secure. He'd come because Harry had sent him a letter, not detailing everything, just enough, "I need you here. Something's happened. I need someone who's mine." Sirius had been through the floor within the hour. He was thinner than the last time Harry had seen him. Still looked like someone who'd been through something that had left marks. But he'd listened to the full story last night without interrupting, which for Sirius was an act of significant self-control, and by the end of it he'd been very still in the specific way of someone running a very large amount of very painful information through a very limited amount of composure. He hadn't said much. He'd said, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." And then he'd sat in his chair and hadn't slept much, and now he was in that same chair with his forearms on his knees, watching Marchetti's working board with the expression of a man waiting for a name he expected to recognize. Harry sat on the bench along the wall between Sirius and the fireplace, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. Neither of them acknowledged this, which made it matter more. "Right," Marchetti said, uncapping a marker that left glowing traces on the transfigured wall. He drew a simple vertical column of 29 marks. 29 workings, 3 categories. "I'll go by category, not chronology." He tapped the board. Category 1, Ministry sanctioned. 3 workings, already identified. Authorization signatures on file. He wrote 2 names. The first was a surname Harry didn't recognize, a ministry official in the Department of Mysteries, according to Marchetti, now retired, whose authorized file had been amended to classify it as a standard monitoring application rather than a suppressive working. This was, Marchetti explained without inflection, a falsification that had been made sometime in Harry's second year, suggesting someone had gone back and changed the records after the fact. The second name was Cornelius Fudge. Sirius made a sound. "He authorized one," Marchetti said. "A single working, approximately 18 months ago, around the time the third task preparations for the tournament were first being floated. The ministry signature is clean and authenticated, it was placed through official channels." He paused. "The working targets social confidence and deference to recognized authority figures. It is, of the 29, probably the crudest. Whoever designed it was working fast. He was scared," Harry said. "Fudge was scared of what I'd be when I grew up. Or scared of what someone else told him you'd be," Fleur said. "Yes," Marchetti said. "Both interpretations are consistent." He moved on. Category 2, Individual. 14 workings, placed by various hands. Some crude, some sophisticated. The 11 pre-Hogwarts ones fall partly here, partly into, he tapped a different section of his notation. "I'll come back to those." He wrote 3 more names. 2 of the individual names Harry didn't know, former ministry workers, one in magical law enforcement and one in the improper use of magic office. Both had had access to him, Marchetti noted, in his early years at the Dursleys, through the standard monitoring protocols applied to all magical children in non-magical households. The third name was Professor Quirinus Quirrell. Sirius let out a breath. "He's dead," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "He is," Marchetti said. The working he placed was done during Harry's first year, in September, early in the term. It targets magical perception, specifically, the ability to read magical intent in others. He looked at Harry. Essentially, it was meant to make you less able to recognize when magic was being worked on or around you without your consent. Harry thought about his first year. About Quirrell's stuttering, his nervous manner, the turban. He thought about how long it had taken him to suspect what was directly in front of him. So he placed a curse to make me bad at spotting curses, Harry said. Essentially, yes. Voldemort's idea, Sirius said flatly. That's not Quirrell's work. That's too sophisticated for Quirrell. Agreed, Marchetti said. The design is consistent with a mind that understood curse architecture at a high level. Quirrell was the hand. Someone else was the architect. He paused. Let the room sit with that. Category 3, he said, and his voice changed slightly, not dramatically, but enough that Harry noticed. More careful. 7 workings, clustered in 2 groups. The first group, for workings, was placed between 6 and 15 months after Harry's birth. The second group, 3 workings, was placed between his 4th and 7th birthdays. He picked up his marker. These are the structural ones. The ones that have calcified. He tapped the board. These are also the most sophisticated workings I have encountered in 12 years of professional curse breaking. The room was very quiet. Sophisticated how? Isabeau asked. She already knew, Harry suspected. She was asking so Marchetti could explain it clearly. They don't behave like standard suppression curses, Marchetti said. They behave like load-bearing architecture. They're designed to interact with the natural development of a child's magical core, to integrate with it as it grows, to become so structurally embedded that they appear to be part of the core itself. When Madame Pomfrey's diagnostic flagged unusual magical signature, she wasn't misidentifying something alien. She was correctly identifying something that had been made to look native. He set the marker down. These are not ministry work. These are not crude ministry work. These were done by someone who understood magical architecture at a level that puts them in a category of perhaps 30 living practitioners. He turned. He wrote the name. Harry read it. He read it again. He became aware, distantly, that Sirius's hand was on his arm. He wasn't sure when that had happened. The name on the board was Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The silence lasted until Sirius broke it, which took approximately 30 seconds and was, Harry thought, probably the most restrained 30 seconds of Sirius Black's life. I want to be clear about what I'm looking at, Sirius said. His voice was level in the way that a held wire was level, taut, controlled, one movement away from something. That is a confirmed signature. Not probable. Not consistent with. A confirmed, Marchetti said. The Elder diagnostic notation that Isabeau filed includes the full signature breakdown. In magical forensics, a signature match of this precision is equivalent to a fingerprint on a murder weapon. He said this with professional flatness. There is no ambiguity. 7, Harry said. He was still looking at the name. He placed 7 of them. For in your first year and 3 between your 4th and 7th birthdays, Marchetti said. Which means, he was at Godric's Hollow, Sirius said, and now the wire was vibrating. Right after. He was the first one there after Hagrid. He stopped. Put both hands on his own knees. He was there. In the house. He was the first person on that scene. Nobody said anything. He placed 4 on an infant, Fleur said quietly, from by the bookshelf. Her voice was very controlled. A child who had just lost both his parents. Yes, Marchetti said. And then came back, she continued, when that child was between 4 and 7 years old, to Privet Drive presumably, to add 3 more, to account for the natural development of the core he'd already started suppressing, because the first 4 weren't holding perfectly as I grew, Harry said. He was surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. He was doing the thing, the internal accounting, the take it in and put it somewhere you can carry it, and it was working, though he could feel the cost of it in the tightness of his chest and the specific pressure behind his eyes. He had to adjust for however much of me kept getting through anyway. Yes, Marchetti said, with the particular gentleness of someone delivering a diagnosis they wish they could change. That is precisely the interpretation the architecture supports. Sirius stood up. He didn't do anything with the standing, didn't pace, didn't shout, he just stood, which was somehow more alarming. His face had gone through several things very quickly and had arrived at something flat and cold that Harry recognized as the face Sirius put on when he was deciding what to do with something that had no good options. 12 years, Sirius said. I sat in Azkaban for 12 years. And the whole time, he stopped. The whole time, Harry was, Sirius, Harry said. He was supposed to, Sirius's voice cracked. Not loudly. Just a small fracture, like the hairline crack in Dumbledore's composure that Fleur had seen, except this wasn't controlled, this was the real thing. I trusted him. I trusted him with you. I told Dumbledore, before everything, before Godric's Hollow, I told him the plan, I told him, Sirius. Harry stood too. He was aware of Fleur and Isabeau and Marchetti and Maxime in the room and he didn't particularly care. He put a hand on Sirius's arm, and his godfather looked at him with an expression that Harry hadn't seen on him before, something broken open and raw and full of a guilt he'd been carrying for over a decade now given new dimensions. It's not your fault, Harry said simply. I should have, you were framed and put in Azkaban, Harry said. There was nothing you could have done from Azkaban. Before. I should have, you were 21, Harry said. You were in a war. You trusted the person who was supposed to be leading your side. He paused. I'm not interested in who failed to protect me in the past. I'm interested in what we do now. Sirius looked at him. Something moved through his godfather's face, grief, love, the particular pain of looking at someone you'd let down and having them refuse to agree that you had, and then the cold flat look came back, except this time it wasn't flat, it was something more purposeful. What do we do now? Sirius said, not a question. We keep taking curses off me, Harry said, and we watch what Dumbledore does, and we give France everything they need to make a proper case, and we get through this tournament, and we deal with the thing that's actually coming. He looked at the name on the board. Dumbledore is a problem. But Voldemort is the reason Dumbledore felt like he needed to do this. And Voldemort is still out there, Sirius said. Still out there, Harry confirmed. And getting closer. There's something about this tournament, he paused, and looked at Marchetti. The monitoring ward that triggered when Dumbledore ran his sweep. You said there were 9 recent curses, and 3 of them were ministry signed. What about the other 6? Marchetti went back to his board. The other 6 recent workings, he said, tapping a cluster of marks at the top of the column, are the ones I told you earlier were continental in technique. I've now had time to complete that analysis. He circled the cluster. The magical residue is highly specific. The technique is obscure, a variant of dark suppression work that was in use in Central Europe in the 1960s and 70s, associated with a specific practitioner tradition. He looked at Harry. The signatures are consistent with a single practitioner. Someone who is current, these were placed within the year. And the magical style is consistent with work I've previously seen associated with the followers of Lord Voldemort. He had someone place curses on me this year, Harry said. From outside. Before the tournament, Marchetti confirmed. Possibly in preparation for whatever the tournament is meant to achieve. Fleur's expression was one of precise, cold clarity. The tournament is a mechanism, she said. Something in this tournament is designed to put him in a specific position. And the curses were meant to ensure he arrived at that position in a sufficiently diminished state, Harry said. Yeah. He thought about the graveyard dream, the last one he'd had, the dark figure and the cold voice. I know what they're trying to do with me. Harry, Isabeau said from her chair, speaking for the first time since the names had gone on the board. She was looking at him steadily. What do you know? He told them about the dreams. About Voldemort, about Wormtail, about the plan, what he'd glimpsed, what he'd pieced together. Sirius already knew some of it, the rest of the room heard it for the first time, and the quality of the listening changed. A ritual, Marchetti said, when Harry had finished. Using your blood. That's why the curses need to exist, not just to keep him manageable, but because a suppressed magical core interacts differently with blood magic, Isabeau said, and her voice was the quietest and most dangerous it had been all morning. A diminished core. A core that has been, she stopped. When she spoke again her voice was perfectly level, which was the voice she used for things that enraged her. If Voldemort performs a blood rite on a person whose magical core has been systematically suppressed, the rite draws on both the blood itself and the suppressed potential. It creates a compressed magical event. It would be significantly more powerful than the same rite performed on an ordinary person. And if the curses are removed? Harry asked. Then the rite doesn't work as designed, Marchetti said. A full, unimpeded magical core doesn't submit to that kind of blood magic the same way. The interaction is different. Less predictable for the person performing it. Harry thought about this. So removing the curses doesn't just free me, he said. It also breaks the ritual design. Significantly complicates it, Marchetti said carefully. Whether it prevents it entirely depends on how many we remove and in what time frame. Then we go faster, Harry said. Isabeau and Marchetti exchanged a look. The structural ones, Isabeau said. The 7 Dumbledore placed. They cannot be rushed. The integration is too deep. Moving too fast risks, what? Backlash, Marchetti said. Core damage. We could, in attempting to remove them too quickly, cause irreversible harm to your magical foundation. He met Harry's eyes directly. I will not do that. Then we work to the fastest safe pace, Harry said. Not reckless. But not cautious for its own sake either. He looked at Marchetti and then at Isabeau. I trust your judgment on what's safe. I'm asking you to push the edge of it. Marchetti looked at Isabeau. She looked back at him. Something passed between them that was the communication of two professionals deciding something together. 3 more tonight, Isabeau said. Then we rest 2 days. The structural ones need preparation. I need to build a counter-architecture before we can safely begin on them. 2 days, Harry said. 2 days, she confirmed. And in those 2 days, you attend this tournament. You do exactly what you've been doing. You give no one who is watching any indication that anything has changed. Harry looked at the name on the board. At Albus Dumbledore's full name written in Marchetti's glowing notation. He's going to approach me, Harry said. He'll want a conversation. He runs those sweeps and he knows curses are coming down, and he'll want to, he thought about it. He'll want to manage the situation. Put me back in the frame. What will you do? Fleur asked. Harry considered. I'll be polite, he said. I'll be exactly what I've always been when I sit in his office. Respectful, quiet, slightly deferential. He paused. Because now I'll know it's a performance. And he won't know I know. Sirius looked at him. James would have burned the whole castle down, he said. It wasn't quite criticism. James didn't have 26 curses left to remove, Harry said. The conversation with Dumbledore came the next day. He was summoned, that was the word for it, really, a politely worded note appearing by his breakfast plate that said the headmaster would appreciate a brief word at his convenience, which was the phrasing Dumbledore used when he meant come to my office this morning. Harry showed it to no one, pocketed it, and went at 10. The office was exactly as it always was. The whirring silver instruments. The portraits of previous headmasters looking down with their centuries of accumulated perspective. Fawkes on his perch, who looked at Harry when he entered and let out a note, low, clear, a single pure tone that seemed to Harry, today, not like a welcome but like a question. Dumbledore was behind his desk and stood when Harry came in, which he always did, the courtesy of acknowledging a person's presence rather than making them approach while you remained seated. He gestured to the chair across from the desk. Harry. The warm voice. The half-moon glasses, the considering expression. How are you getting on? Fine, sir, Harry said, and sat down, and looked at Dumbledore with precisely the respectful attentiveness he'd always given him, feeling the difference from the inside now, feeling that it was his choice rather than a designed response. The first task went very well, Dumbledore said. The Accio, that was creative. I don't believe anyone anticipated that solution. A small, genuine-seeming smile. You think laterally. It's a quality I've always admired. Thank you, sir. The silence that followed was the kind that had always made Harry want to fill it, and he sat in it instead, letting it be empty, watching Dumbledore watch him. I understand the French ministry has taken an interest in your welfare, Dumbledore said. Still warm. Still measured. The careful man adapting. It's a complex situation. International magical politics can be quite overwhelming, particularly for a student who has a great deal already on his plate. It's been fine, Harry said. Everyone's been very clear with me. Something moved behind Dumbledore's eyes. The slight recalibration of someone who'd anticipated a different dynamic and was adjusting. I'm glad to hear that. I want to assure you that I'm handling things on this end, speaking with the ministry, ensuring the process remains constructive. Harry offered. Yes. A slight pause. Exactly. I've known you since you were very young, Harry, and your well-being matters to me enormously. If there are concerns, about what the French ministry has told you, about any of the allegations that are circulating, I want you to know you can come to me. Harry looked at him. He looked at the kind eyes and the silver beard and the immense accumulated authority and something that had been held in place by 26 remaining curses and sheer long habit, some deep reflexive pull toward this office and this man and the safety his approval had always felt like, and it was present but it was loose now, it was something he could see from the outside rather than experience from the inside, and the seeing made all the difference. I appreciate that, sir, Harry said. He did not say I will. It was a small distinction. Dumbledore noticed it. Harry watched him notice it and watched him choose not to acknowledge that he'd noticed it and watched him redirect. The second task will be approaching, Dumbledore said. Have you been working on your golden egg? Yes, sir. He had. The egg was a problem he was applying actual, genuine concentration to, because the tournament was still real regardless of everything else happening around it. Good. I have complete confidence in you. Another warm smile. The paternal warmth that had always felt like sunshine and now felt like something he was being offered, which was different. You're remarkably resilient, Harry. Whatever you've been told about yourself, whatever narrative others are constructing around you, the truth is that you've thrived in adversity your entire life. That is who you are. He said this like a comfort. Like a gift. Harry thought, he's telling me the cage is my nature. He's telling me this is just who I am. He said, thank you, Professor. That means a lot. He left the office 3 minutes later and stood in the corridor and took a breath and felt, very specifically, the place where the first broken curse used to be, the absence that had given him room, and he thought about what Dumbledore had said, you've thrived in adversity, and thought about a fire with a wall built around it. Thriving was one word for it. He had a different word now. That evening, Sirius found him on the battlements. Harry had gone up there because he needed sky over his head, and the castle occasionally felt like it was doing something to the air when he'd been inside too long. The view from the battlements was good, the lake below, the ground spreading out, the forbidden forest dark on the east edge, the lights of Hogsmeade in the distance. Cold up here, genuinely cold, Scottish November doing its work with systematic efficiency, but the cold was fine, it was honest. Sirius came up the stairs without stealth, which was considerate. How was it? He asked, meaning the conversation with Dumbledore. Instructive, Harry said. Sirius leaned against the parapet beside him. They looked at the view together for a while, in the way of people who had the capacity for comfortable silence, which was a quality they discovered they shared during the brief months they'd managed last year. I keep thinking about Azkaban, Sirius said eventually. He said it simply, not dramatically, just putting it out between them. I don't mean the Dementors. I mean just the time. The 12 years. And all that time, I kept thinking about how I'd failed James. How I'd missed something. And I'd go over and over it in my head, what I'd missed, where I'd gone wrong. He paused. And I had the wrong question. Harry looked at him sideways. I was asking what I'd missed, Sirius said. What I'd done wrong. How I'd failed. And the answer that kept coming back was, nothing. I'd done everything right. I'd been loyal, I'd been careful, he stopped. And the reason I couldn't find my failure was because the failure wasn't mine. He looked at his hands on the parapet. Someone very good made very sure it would look like mine. It wasn't your fault, Harry said again. I know, Sirius said, and this time it sounded marginally more like he meant it. I'm working on that. He looked at Harry. What I'm actually getting at is, I'm not going to spend the next however long asking the wrong questions. Not anymore. He straightened up. So. The curses. The tournament. Voldemort. What do you need from me? Harry thought about it. Can you get to Remus? He asked. Sirius looked at him. Moony. Yes. Not quickly, he's abroad, but, I need someone I trust who understands the dark arts at a high level, Harry said. Not to fight. To understand. The ritual, what Voldemort's planning, the blood magic, I need someone who can tell me what we're actually facing and whether there's a way to, he paused. Whether there's a way to turn it. Turn it, Sirius said slowly. If the ritual requires my blood, and the ritual requires my core to be suppressed, Harry said, then maybe there's a version of this where I go into that situation, if I can't avoid it, on completely different terms than Voldemort planned for. Sirius stared at him. I'm 14, Harry said, not stupid. I'm aware, Sirius said. I'm also, he stopped. Started again. James used to do this. Stand somewhere cold and work out how to turn a situation around, usually while everyone else was still catching up to the fact that it was bad. And I'm going to reach out to Remus tomorrow, Sirius said. Absolutely. He paused. Also, Hermione. Hermione. She's been researching the Accord. Fleur mentioned she asked for the text. He glanced at Harry. She also mentioned that Hermione was approximately 1 day away from having a more complete understanding of the Accord's legal provisions than the average French ministry solicitor. Harry laughed. It was brief and surprised out of him, genuinely unforced. Yeah, he said. That sounds right. She's brilliant, Sirius said, simply and sincerely. She is, Harry agreed. They stood in the cold for a while longer. Harry, Sirius said. When Dumbledore, he stopped, trying to find words. When all of this, the formal process, the investigation, when it gets to the point where people have to decide what to do about what he did. Are you going to be? I don't know yet, Harry said honestly. He's complicated. Some of what he did, I think he thought it was for a reason. Not a good reason, but a reason he believed in. He paused. That doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it, he looked out at the dark lake. But I'm not going to pretend it's simple. And I'm not going to make any decisions about it until I know everything. Sirius nodded slowly. Fair. The thing that matters right now, Harry said, is getting through this tournament alive and not letting Voldemort use me for whatever he's planned. Everything else comes after. Everything else comes after, Sirius echoed. They stayed up there until the cold drove them in, which took a while, because neither of them was particularly bothered by the cold. 3 more curses came down that night, in the corridor with the amber sconces and Marchetti's careful hands and Isabeau's overlapping diagnostics. They were harder than the first 4, each one requiring more time, more adjustment, more of the sustained, focused work that Marchetti made look effortless and wasn't. The 6th removal, the 3rd of the night, was one of the individual signature ones, placed during Harry's first year, and when it came down the anger came back, the clean physical kind, but bigger this time, with a sharpness that wasn't aggression, exactly. More like clarity. The specific sharpness of seeing something that had been blurry come suddenly into focus. He sat with it this time instead of fighting it. Fleur was watching him from the wall. She'd been watching each removal with a focused attention that he'd gotten used to, the attention of someone both monitoring for the physical effects and tracking something else, something she catalogued carefully and didn't comment on. "What are you seeing?" he asked. This time, between the 3rd removal and the steadying period, when the room had gone quiet and Marchetti was writing and Isabeau was resting her hands. Fleur looked at him. "When a curse breaks," she said, "and the core expands into the freed space, there's a moment where I can see the full resonance. What's underneath?" She paused. "What's been there the whole time?" "And?" She held his gaze. She stopped. Something happened in her expression, the very controlled person allowing something honest through. "I have felt powerful magical cores before. My grandmother's. Victor Crumb's. Several of the magical creatures my family works with." She looked at him steadily. "What is underneath your suppression is not comparable to those." "It is," she searched for words and chose them carefully. "It is the kind of thing that makes sense of the war. Of why Voldemort feared you enough to try to kill you at 15 months old. Of why someone took this much time and care building a cage around you." He absorbed this quietly. "Is that why he started?" "The mate blocking specifically," she said, "yes. A person with a core like yours, who forms a genuine soul bond, the combined resonance would be extraordinary. A genuine threat to any opposing force." She paused. "The curses serve multiple purposes. Suppression of general output. Isolation from genuine connection. And," she looked away briefly, then back. "And the destabilization of whatever bond is trying to form naturally." The room was very quiet. "What bond?" Harry said slowly. It wasn't quite a question. Fleur didn't look away. She also didn't answer immediately, which was its own kind of answer. "That," she said, "is a conversation for when more of them are gone." He nodded. He filed it in the same place he'd filed her earlier answer, the folder that was getting heavier but that he wasn't afraid of. He was 14 and there were 23 remaining curses and a Dark Lord making plans and a man he'd trusted his whole life who had placed 7 of them, and whatever was forming between him and Fleur Delacour, this very specific thing, this thing with weight and warmth and the quality of something that had been growing in the wrong direction for a long time and was now, cautiously, beginning to turn toward light, that could wait. But it didn't have to wait forever. 2 days, he said, referring to the rest period. 2 days, she confirmed. And then the structural ones. And then the structural ones, Isabeau confirmed from her chair, and her voice was steady and professional, and she was not looking at either of them with any expression whatsoever. Harry stood, tested his legs, found them adequate. "Right," he said, and went to bed, and lay in the dark of his 4-poster and felt 7 curses worth of space inside him and the specific feeling of forward motion, of a situation that had been static for 14 years beginning, finally, to move. He slept with his wand in his hand. He always had. He understood, now, why. 2 days later, at breakfast, Hermione slid a 12-page document across the table to him. It was double-sided, in her smallest handwriting, thoroughly annotated, indexed, and cross-referenced with 3 additional French-language sources she'd acquired via what she described only as correspondence. Article 7, she said quietly, as he turned to the first page. Subsection 4. I think you'll find it relevant. He read it. Subsection 4 of Article 7 of the Accord de Lyons stated that in cases where the violation of mate bond protections was found to have been performed by a figure in a position of legal guardianship or authority over the protected person, the aggrieved party was entitled not merely to remedy and protection but to full legal restitution, including the formal removal of the offending party from any position of authority over the protected person. He looked at Hermione. If the French ministry formally names Dumbledore, she said, very quietly, under this subsection, he can't remain headmaster. Not of a school with British ministry oversight. The Accord supersedes the ministry's charter in this specific case. He put the document in his bag. Thank you, he said. Harry. Her voice was very level. Are you okay? He thought about the battlements and the cold air and Sirius's shoulder next to his and the absence of 7 curses and Fleur's careful, honest expression and the name on Marchetti's board and the file it was now in, the one he was carrying but not yet opening all the way. Getting better, he said. Actually getting better. She nodded. She turned back to her own breakfast. Ron passed the pumpkin juice without being asked. Chapter 5. The Dragon and the Vila. The second task nearly killed Cedric Diggory. Not the Mere People, not the Grindylows, not the underwater pressure or the cold. Cedric nearly drowned because the bubblehead charm he'd used broke at 40 feet below the surface when something interfered with his magic, a localized disruption, targeted and precise, lasting approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough. He'd fought his way up with half a lungful of water and his hostage still at the bottom, and he'd broken the surface 30 feet from the platform, coughing lake water in violent heaves while Dumbledore and the other judges watched from the stands and a pair of Hogwarts Mere People watched from the water with expressions that suggested this was neither their fault nor their problem. Harry had already finished. He'd come up 6 minutes before the hour, second place, Fleur first by 40 seconds, Crumb third, and he'd been sitting on the platform wrapped in a towel, watching Cedric's bubblehead charm fail from the water's surface, and he'd gone back in. He'd gone back in without thinking, which was the most Harry thing he'd ever done according to Ron, who described it afterward with a mixture of admiration and exasperation that was very Ron. He hadn't needed to do much. Cedric was conscious, disoriented, swimming upward, and Harry had simply gotten underneath him, gotten an arm around his chest, and driven them both to the surface with a propulsion charm that was significantly more powerful than the one he'd used the previous hour. The water came off them in a spray when they hit air, and the crowd's reaction was a brief loud sound that was either alarm or excitement and possibly both. Cedric sat on the platform for 5 minutes just breathing. What happened? Harry asked him, quiet, just between them. Cedric looked at him with the slightly unfocused expression of someone whose body had recently made very serious suggestions about mortality. My charm broke, he said. It broke. Mid-task. I've cast that charm 100 times. I know, Harry said. Something interfered with it, Cedric said. He looked at Harry, and something moved in his grey eyes, some careful question. Have you noticed anything strange about this tournament? Harry looked at him for a long moment. Yes, he said simply. Cedric nodded slowly. He looked like someone who just confirmed something he'd been trying not to believe. Right, he said, and accepted the towel that a Hogwarts official was handing him, and didn't say anything else, but his eyes went to the judging platform with a focus that wasn't entirely confusion anymore. Fleur had watched the whole thing from the platform. She'd been standing very still, towel around her shoulders, her hair still wet, and when Harry climbed back up she looked at him with an expression that was 5 different things at once and kept very carefully in check. She handed him a second towel. He took it. You lost points, she said. Bringing up someone else's hostage. I know, he said. You were already second. I know. She looked at him for a moment. Idiot, she said, but her voice was completely wrong for the word. The scoring put Harry third. Fleur first, Crumb second, Harry third by a point, Cedric fourth after the rescue was taken into account in some complicated deliberation among the judges about what the task's rules said about external intervention. There was an argument in the judges' stand that Harry watched without particular investment while Hermione described it to him in real time from 12 rows up in the stands with the focused commentary of a sports analyst who found the rules genuinely interesting. Third wasn't bad. Third kept him in the tournament. Third kept him exactly where someone wanted him to be, which was visible and present and progressing toward the third task. He was fine with third. What he wasn't fine with was the look on Bartemius Crouch Sr.'s face when Harry climbed out of the lake, a look that was there for maybe 2 seconds before Crouch reassembled his expression into something more appropriate, a look of calculation, of rapid assessment, of someone checking a list and finding something not quite where it was supposed to be. Harry noted it. Said nothing. Filed it. Crouch Sr. was increasingly absent from the tournament's official functions, showing up irregularly, looking worse each time. The real Moody, the thing wearing Moody's face, was a constant presence, all swiveling magical eye and deliberate menace, and Harry had been looking at him differently for 2 weeks now, looking at him with the sharper eyes that came with 7 broken curses and the specific diagnostic improvement that Marchetti had confirmed. The curse Quirrell had placed to dull magical perception, the one they'd taken down 4 nights ago, had left Harry notably better at reading magical intent around him. The magical eye moved differently when it swept over Harry now. Slight adjustment in the pupil, the tiniest recalibration, like a compass needle shifted by a new magnetic field. The thing wearing Moody's face was measuring something. Harry let it measure. The preparation for the structural curses began on a Wednesday. Isabeau spent the first morning building what she called the counter-architecture, a framework of supporting charms that would hold Harry's magical core stable while the embedded, integrated curses were removed from it, the way scaffolding held a building while internal walls were taken out. This required Harry to sit in the center of it while she worked around him, and the experience was odd, not painful, but deeply strange, like having someone rearrange furniture in a room you'd been living in so long you'd stopped seeing the furniture. He sat cross-legged on the floor of Maxime's study and breathed and felt Isabeau's work settling around him like a framework of very thin light. Stay perfectly still, she said, which was less a direction than a professional habit, because Harry had been still for the last 20 minutes. I know, he said. I know you know, she said. I say it anyway. Fleur was in the room. She'd been there for every session, not because she was required to be but because she was, and Harry had stopped finding this remarkable and started finding it simply part of the shape of things. She was in the chair by the window with her grandmother's record book open in her lap, logging Isabeau's work, which was something Isabeau could do herself and chose to delegate, and Harry had thought about this delegation carefully and decided Isabeau was more like Fleur than either of them acknowledged. Counter-architecture complete, Isabeau said, stepping back and surveying her work with the expression of an engineer looking at a new bridge. How does it feel? Odd, Harry said. Describe odd. He thought about it. Like there's something new holding the edges. The places where the curses are, it feels like there's something there now supporting the space around them. Like you've built the room that'll be there after the furniture's removed. Isabeau looked at him over her glasses. You have, she said, a surprisingly accurate spatial intuition for magical structure. He's been building walls since he was a child, Sirius said from the doorway. He'd come in quietly a few minutes ago, and he said it without particular weight, just as observation, and then looked slightly like he wished he hadn't said it. Nobody filled the silence. It didn't need filling. First structural one, Isabeau said, tomorrow morning. Not tonight. I want 12 hours for the counter-architecture to settle. She began packing her tools with methodical care. Tonight, rest. Eat. Sleep properly. Drink water. These are not optional suggestions. I know, Harry said. You say that a great deal, she observed. Because you keep telling me things I already know, he said. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh but lived in its neighborhood, and finished packing her bag. He didn't sleep properly. Not because of nerves, or not entirely, more because the counter-architecture Isabeau had built was doing something subtle to his awareness of the suppressive workings, and lying in the dark he could feel all 7 of Dumbledore's with a specificity he hadn't had before. The way you could feel a splinter more acutely once someone had put pressure around it to draw it out. He lay there at 2 in the morning and thought about 7 deliberate acts. 7 times a man had come to him, once at Godric's Hollow with his parents dead, once in Privet Drive while the Desleys watched television in the next room, once in Privet Drive again, once, he thought, at King's Cross, once, he didn't know. 7 times. With the cold precision of someone building an architecture of diminishment in a child's magical core. He tried to find hate in it and found something more complicated than hate. He found the specific grief of someone who discovered that a thing they'd never quite had, because it had always been just slightly out of reach, the warmth he'd expected from that office, that man, that relationship, had been designed to be just out of reach. That the gap wasn't his failure but someone's construction. That was the part that cost the most to hold. He got up at 4, dressed, went down to the common room, and sat by the fire until the sky outside the tower windows went from black to gray. He was working on the golden egg problem, he'd solved it, the Mirish language, the underwater task, all of that was done, and what he was actually doing now was thinking about the 3rd task. The maze. The complete unknown of what would be inside it. He thought about what Marchetti had said. The ritual requires a specific position. The tournament is a mechanism. The 3rd task was the delivery system. Whatever was in the maze, it would put one champion at the Triwizard Cup first. And the cup was going to be a portkey. He was as certain of this as he'd been certain of anything, the bone-deep certainty of someone whose improved magical perception had been quietly noting things for weeks, noting Crouch's calculation and the fake Moody's measuring eye and the way certain paths in the tournament had been consistently, subtly narrowed toward a single outcome. He needed to be ready for it. He needed to go into that maze not as a boy being managed toward a predetermined destination but as himself, with whatever of himself he'd managed to recover, making his own choices. Ron came down at 6:30 and found Harry by the fire with parchment covered in diagrams. "You've been up for a while," Ron said, looking at the diagrams, then at Harry's face, then back at the diagrams with the resigned understanding of someone who'd learned not to argue with a particular quality of Harry's focus. "Yeah," Harry said. Ron sat down in the other chair without being invited, which Harry appreciated, because it meant he didn't have to say sit down and have a conversation about it. Ron pulled his knees up, looked at the fire. "2nd task was good," Ron said. "You were brilliant underwater. Cedric's lucky you went back." "Cedric's smart," Harry said. He noticed something was wrong with his charm. "He's been noticing things." "Should we? I'm thinking about it," Harry said. "Maybe. He deserves to know some of it." Ron was quiet for a moment. "He's decent," he said. "Proper decent." The thing at the Yule Ball with Hermione, he stopped, because the Yule Ball and Hermione was a slightly loaded topic, and Harry watched Ron navigate around it with the care of someone walking through a room they'd recently broken something in. "He was decent to her," Ron said. "That's all." "He is," Harry agreed. "Harry." Ron looked at him sideways. "The 3rd task. What about it? Whatever's coming, whatever's in that maze, whatever they've set up. You're going in differently than last year's Harry would have, yeah." Harry looked at him. "I mean," Ron turned his ear slightly toward the fire, which was a red-ear incoming gesture if Harry had ever seen one. "I mean I've been watching you the last 3 weeks. You're different. Not different like, you're still you. But bigger. I don't know how else to say it." "Bigger," Harry said. "Like you used to fit exactly inside your own skin and now you're," Ron made a vague gesture. "Slightly more. I don't know. I notice things about magic, it's one of my better qualities." Harry looked at his friend and felt, with specific warmth, the reality of 4 years of choosing each other, of this particular form of loyalty which was never eloquent and was completely real. "Yeah," Harry said. "I am different." "Good," Ron said firmly. "Whatever's in that maze, I wanted to meet that version of you." The first structural curse came down on Thursday morning. It took 47 minutes. Isabeau worked with her hands in the framework of the counter-architecture, moving with the focused precision of someone performing surgery with tools she'd spent a lifetime learning, and Marchetti maintained the scaffolding from outside it, and Harry sat in the center of it and breathed and felt the thing that had been there since he was 15 months old begin to shift. It wasn't like the other removals. The other removals had been pressures lifting, localized, specific, a weight going from present to absent. This was more like tectonic. Like something deep and structural slowly moving, and the movement affecting everything built on top of it. Harry felt it in his arms and chest and behind his eyes, felt it in his magic the way you felt a ground shift in your feet, and he breathed and stayed still and let it happen. When it came free, he made no sound. He was beyond sound. He was in a place where the body reported facts without narrative. This is happening, this is real, this is the specific quality of a thing that has been present since before memory now becoming absent. The expanded space it left was not like the others. It was vast. Disproportionately vast, in the way that removing a load-bearing wall revealed how large the room behind it had always been. He felt it spread out through his magical core like light going somewhere it hadn't reached before, and he sat in the sensation and let it settle, and when he opened his eyes and looked at his hands they looked exactly the same. He was suddenly, profoundly sure that he could do things. Not specific things. Not a list. Just the generalized, bone-certain knowledge of someone who'd been running at half their capacity their entire life and had just felt what full capacity was, and it was, not threatening, exactly. More like coming into a room that had always been yours. Isabeau was watching him carefully. "How are you?" she asked. "Good," he said. He tested the word and it was accurate. "Your core is adjusting," she said. "Give it time." "How much time?" "The rest of today," she said. "Tonight we do another. 2 in 1 day." 2 in 1 day, she confirmed. They are paired workings, they interact. Separating them by more than 12 hours would cause instability. She looked at him steadily. "You will be significantly more powerful after tonight than you are right now. I need you to know that. I need you to be ready for it." "I'm ready," he said. "You will be," she said, which was different, and she said it with such certainty that he believed her. The second structural curse that night took 1 hour and 3 minutes and at one point, midway through, Harry felt the counter-architecture strain and heard Marchetti say something very rapid in French that was almost certainly not a polite phrase and then felt it stabilize and held himself absolutely still with the focused will of someone who'd been practicing stillness for 3 weeks. When it came free, the sensation was what he could only describe afterward to Sirius as coming through the surface of something. Sirius had looked at him and said, very quietly, "Like coming out of water?" And Harry had said, "Yes. Exactly like that." He stood up afterward without difficulty. He felt, different was the wrong word, because different implied comparison to a known state, and what he felt was more like correct. Like something that had always been described as a feature was revealed to be the absence of something else. He cast a simple lumos. The light that came off his wand was not dramatically different. It wasn't larger, it didn't glow in colors, there was no theatrical display. It was just light. But the quality of it was different. The ease of it. The sensation in his hand and wrist and magical core of something moving from where it lived to where it was needed, free. Completely, unimpededly free. He looked at it for a moment. Fleur, from the wall, stop smiling. You'll make Olivier nervous. Marchetti, who was writing, I am not nervous. I am calculating whether my insurance covers this. Isabeau, who was sitting down and drinking water with the exhaustion of someone who'd done heavy lifting all day, both of you stop. Harry put the lumos out. He was still smiling, though. He was aware of this and had decided it was acceptable. 2 days later, the third structural curse. The fourth, 3 days after that. The fifth took 1 session. The sixth required 2, across consecutive days, because Marchetti identified an interaction with the fifth that required additional preparation. The seventh, the last of Dumbledore's, was scheduled for the week before the third task. In the gaps between sessions, life continued. Lessons continued. Harry attended them differently now. Not disruptively, not with any visible change that would cause comment, but internally differently, with the awareness of someone who'd always been working against resistance and was now working without it. Transfiguration, which had always been one of his stronger subjects, became noticeably easier. He finished exercises before other students, not by rushing but by virtue of the spells simply going where he sent them without the usual friction. McGonagall looked at him once during a lesson with a sharp, considering expression, opened her mouth, and then closed it again. He thought she filed it away. Charms was different. Flitwick, who had always been encouraging, gave Harry an assessor's look during a practical exam that suggested he was revising certain assumptions. Defense against the arts, fake Moody, was where the change mattered most. The magical eye swept over Harry at the start of every lesson, and Harry led it, and said nothing, and participated in class with normal engagement. But he was watching fake Moody with everything he had now, with 7 freed workings worth of cleared magical perception, and what he saw, consistently, was this, calculation. Continuous, focused, intelligent calculation, the kind that belonged to someone who was managing variables in a complex ongoing operation. Whatever the fake Moody was measuring, Harry gave it nothing useful. He was careful about this the way he was careful about the Dumbledore conversations, performing the expected version of himself while the real version quietly did other things. He told Cedric on a Tuesday. He found him in an empty classroom after dinner, sent a note in the afternoon, "Can we talk? Classroom on the 4th floor, 7 o'clock, come alone," and when Cedric arrived he looked at Harry with the expression of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this conversation and wasn't sure whether that was a good sign. "I'm going to tell you things," Harry said, "that I need you to not repeat. Not to teachers, not to anyone outside this room for now. I'm going to trust you with this because I think you deserve to know and because I think you're smart enough to act on it correctly." Cedric sat down on the edge of a desk. "All right," he said. "Just, all right." Harry told him about the portkey theory. Told him, without going into the full history of curse work and French interventions, that there was intelligence suggesting the third task was being used as a vehicle for something significantly more dangerous than a school competition. That the maze would be modified beyond what the official task specifications described. That the cup was the endpoint and the endpoint was the trap. Cedric listened without interrupting. He was very still, the kind of still that meant processing, not shock. "The charm that broke underwater," Cedric said, when Harry finished. "Yes," Harry said. "That wasn't a failure on your part. Someone interfered." "Yes." Cedric's jaw worked briefly. "That could have killed me." "I know," Harry said. "I went back in anyway, so," he stopped. Shrugged. "We're fine." Something in Cedric's expression shifted, some remaining residue of competitive tension dissolving into something more fundamental and less complicated. "If the cup is a portkey," he said, thinking aloud, "and whoever set this up expects a champion to touch it, they want a specific champion." "Yes." "You." "Yes." "Then I don't touch it first," Cedric said. "That's straightforward." "It's not quite that simple," Harry said. "Depending on what's in the maze, not touching it might not be, Harry." Cedric looked at him steadily. He was a 6th year, 2 years older, and he had a particular quality of Hufflepuff directness that Harry had come to respect over the course of this tournament in the way you respected a well-made tool. "Whatever happens in that maze, if you tell me don't touch that cup, I don't touch that cup. Full stop." Harry looked at him. "We're in the same school, Cedric said. My dad works in the same ministry that apparently sanctioned, he stopped, because Harry hadn't told him that much. Whatever is happening around this tournament, we're on the same side. He paused. Aren't we? Yeah, Harry said. We are. Right, Cedric said. Then we go into that maze with a plan. He stood up, and something in the set of his shoulders was different, less the careful composure of a student performing well under pressure and more the alertness of someone who decided they were in a real situation and was orienting themselves accordingly. Tell me what you need. The seventh structural curse, the last of Dumbledore's, came down 5 days before the third task. The session lasted 2 hours. It was not, in the physical experience, the hardest. The sixth had been harder in terms of sustained duration, and the first had carried the specific shock of being the deepest and oldest. But the seventh was the one that mattered most in a way that had nothing to do with magical mechanics, and everyone in the room knew it, and nobody mentioned it because they didn't need to. When it was done, Harry sat in the absence of it for a long moment. He reached for the word and couldn't find it in English, and then thought of something Fleur had said once, in passing, about the French word enfin, which translated roughly as at last but carried something more specific than that, the sense of something arriving that had always been coming, that had been on its way the whole time and had simply finally arrived. Enfin. He looked at his hands. All 7, Isabeau said. Her voice had something in it he hadn't heard from her before. Not professional. Personal. All 7 of his are gone. Harry nodded. Sirius was in the room. He'd come for this one specifically, asked to be there, and he was sitting in the corner with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded, and he wasn't looking at Harry, he was looking at a point on the floor between his feet, and the set of his shoulders was the set of a man doing something very quietly in his chest that he hadn't planned for. Harry got up and went and sat next to him. Sirius didn't say anything. Harry didn't say anything. They sat there side by side in the quiet of Maxime's study while Marchetti wrote and Isabeau rested and Fleur stood by the window looking at the grounds. After a while Sirius put an arm around his shoulders. The gesture was brief and awkward and completely genuine. 11 left, Harry said eventually. 11 left, Sirius said. After the task, Harry said. We'll finish them after. Yeah, Sirius said. After. Neither of them discussed whether after would come. It wasn't necessary. The night before the third task, Fleur came to find him. He was on the battlements again, it had become his thinking place, the combination of sky and cold and unobstructed sightlines having apparently become necessary, and she arrived without announcement, which was how she usually arrived, her footsteps on the stone stairs giving him enough notice that he didn't startle but not so much that it felt like an approach. She stood beside him at the parapet and looked out at the grounds. Below them, the maze was visible, the hedges had been growing all year, taller and denser, and the third task's maze now covered the entire Quidditch pitch in dark geometric lines. How are you feeling? She asked. You ask me that every time, he said. You have a different answer every time, she said. He thought about it. 18 curses removed, he said. 11 remaining. I feel like, he paused. Like there are still 11 things pressing on me, but I know what they are now and I know where each one is and I know none of them are me. That's different from 3 weeks ago. It is, she said. 3 weeks ago I didn't know the pressing was there, he said. I thought it was just, how things were. How things always are for you, she said. Yeah. He looked at the maze. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, she confirmed. She was quiet for a moment, standing next to him in the cold with her arms folded against it. I want you to know something, she said. He waited. Whatever happens in that maze, whatever they've arranged, whatever gets set in motion. I am not a spectator. Her voice was level and direct. The French military contingent that arrived this morning, I saw them, he said. He had. 12 people in French ministry tactical robes had arrived through the school's floor that morning, officially as security observers for the Beauxbatons champion. Nobody at Hogwarts had the standing to refuse them, thanks to the French Protection Sovereignty Declaration. They were currently positioned at various points around the school's perimeter. "They're for you officially," he said. "Officially," she agreed. "And practically, they are on the grounds. They have portkey capability. They have full authority under the Sovereignty Declaration to respond to any threat against a protected person." She looked at him. "If something happens to you tonight, if whatever is planned for you goes wrong and you end up somewhere you didn't intend, the French contingent has standing to follow. So if I disappear, you will not disappear alone," she said. "Not anymore." He looked at her. The moonlight was cold on the battlements and she was standing close enough that he could see her expression without ambiguity, the thing she'd been carrying controlled and professional for 3 weeks now fully visible for a moment, just a moment, not soft, not gentle, nothing about Fleur Delacour was soft in the way people expected, but real. The real version, unperformed, direct as a compass needle. "The conversation you said we'd have," he said. "When more of them were gone." She held his gaze. "We don't have to have it now," he said. "No," she agreed. "Not now." She paused. "But soon." "Soon," he said. They stood in the cold for a while, not touching, not speaking, in the specific quality of quiet that belonged to two people who'd chosen each other in the way that didn't need announcing yet, who both knew the choosing had happened and were carrying it carefully until they had space for it. "Survive tomorrow," she said eventually. "I was planning to," he said. "Don't plan. Do." He almost smiled. "Right." The third task was at dusk. The stands were full, every Hogwarts student, every Beauxbatons and Durmstrang delegate, faculty from all 3 schools, ministry officials, families who'd traveled for the occasion. The maze stood at the far end of the grounds, dark and geometrically precise, the hedges standing 8 feet tall and impenetrable, everything inside invisible from the stands. Harry stood at the entrance with the other 3 champions in the last of the daylight and felt the crowd's noise as a kind of pressure and then felt it stop mattering. He was aware of the 11 remaining curses. He was aware of the framework Isabeau had built, still scaffolding his core through the structural removals. He was aware of his wand in his hand and the specific sensation, new, correct, enfin, of his magic responding without resistance. He was aware of Fleur to his right, looking at the maze entrance with an expression of cool calculation. And of Cedric to his left, who glanced at him once, brief and direct, the nod of 2 people who have a plan. He was aware of somewhere in the stands, serious in his animagus form, a large black dog curled unnoticed at the feet of an unsuspecting ministry official. He was aware of Hermione and Ron 11 rose up, both of them watching him with the steady attention of people who knew more than they showed. He was aware, at the perimeter of the grounds, of 12 French tactical officers who officially were not here for him and were completely here for him. He was aware, in the judging stand, of the fake Moody's magical eye making one last slow sweep across him, and the tiny adjustment in the pupil when it found him, and what that adjustment meant. He was ready. Dumbledore raised his wand and the cannon blast sent them in. The maze was wrong within 30 seconds. Not the hedges, not the paths, those were as expected. What was wrong was the magic in it. Harry felt it immediately, with the clarity of improved perception and 18 freed workings. The maze's enchantments had been layered over with something additional, something that wasn't part of any official task specification, dense and directional and designed to funnel. Not to challenge. To funnel. To guide specific paths toward specific outcomes. He stopped at the first junction. He felt the directional work in the air the way you felt wind from a vent, invisible but completely real, pushing gently toward the right-hand path. He went left. He met a blast-ended script 15 feet in, which erupted from the hedge with the enthusiasm of a creature that had no idea it was part of anyone's plan, and he hit it with a full body bind that was precisely, cleanly targeted in a way that made the scripts several hundred pounds fold themselves with startling efficiency. He kept moving. The maze was large and complex and not entirely predictable even without the layered manipulation, someone had done genuine design work on the obstacles, and Harry respected the difficulty of it without being particularly concerned. He moved with the specific confidence of someone who wasn't looking for safety, who was looking for the thing at the center while remaining entirely in control of what he met along the way. A boggart, at the second junction. It took the form of Voldemort, which he'd expected. Cold eyes, no nose, the specific quality of malice that occupied the nightmares. Harry pointed his wand at it, said ridiculous, and turned it into something small and harmless and moved on before the crowd in his chest had time to build. A sphinx at the midpoint, the real kind, golden and enormous, blocking the path with its riddle. He answered it in under a minute. The sphinx looked mildly surprised, which was possibly the most gratifying thing about the whole maze, and stepped aside. He heard Cedric in trouble, a stunning spell, red light visible over the hedge top, and then the crash of something falling, 2 minutes before he reached the cup. He went through the hedge instead of around it. The cutting charm that opened it up was the most powerful he'd cast yet, and the hedge parted like it had been waiting for permission, an 8-foot wall of impenetrable magical growth splitting cleanly down the middle, and he was through it and into the adjacent path before the pieces stopped falling. Cedric was on the ground. Conscious, barely, a stunner had clipped him rather than caught him clean, and he was sitting up by the time Harry got there, looking at something that wasn't in the path anymore. What was it? Harry said. Didn't see it clearly, Cedric said, letting Harry pull him to his feet. Came from the hedge. Could have been, person, Harry said. He looked at the hedge where the spell had come from. The shaped compression in the branches was consistent with a person pressing through, moving away. Someone in the maze who isn't a champion. Cedric's expression went very still. Cup's 30 meters ahead, Harry said. Can you move? Yes, Cedric said, and meant it. They went together. The cup was on a plinth in the center of the final clearing, golden, glowing, turning slowly on its axis with the self-important air of a magical object that understood it was significant. The clearing was larger than the path had suggested, 20 feet across, the hedges forming a perfect circle, and the cup at the center throwing light that was slightly wrong in color, too bright at the edges, the specific visual signature of an object that was doing something. Harry stopped at the clearing's edge. Don't touch it, he said, to Cedric, who was at his shoulder. I wasn't going to, Cedric said. Harry looked at the cup. He felt its magic from here, the portkey enchantment sitting inside the Triwizard magic like a passenger, confident and waiting. He thought about where it was going. He thought about a cold voice in his dreams, a dark figure, a plan that had been building since before he was born. He thought about blood magic and suppressed cores and 29 deliberate acts over 14 years. He thought about Enfin. I'm going to touch it, he said. Cedric looked at him. I thought, they said it for a diminished version of me, Harry said. Whatever the ritual expects, I'm not that anymore. And I'm not going alone. He looked at Cedric. Behind me. Not grabbing the cup. 2 meters back, wand drawn, ready for anything. When I go, you don't follow unless I call. Cedric held his gaze. You're sure, Cedric said. Yes, Harry said. He wasn't performing the certainty. It was real, rooted in 18 removals and 3 weeks of changed self-knowledge and the bone-deep understanding of someone who'd just been given back enough of themselves to make a genuine choice. He crossed the clearing in 6 steps and grabbed the cup. The portkey took him in a rush of blue light and sensation, and behind him, just before the clearing disappeared, he heard Cedric shout something, his name, just his name, and heard it the way you heard things through water, and then there was nothing but movement. The French tactical officer stationed at the maze's eastern perimeter felt it. She felt it the way all 12 of them had been trained to feel it, the specific signature of a French sovereignty ward being carried rapidly away from its registered location, moving fast, moving far, and she didn't wait. She pulled her portkey. 3 seconds after Harry Potter disappeared from the Triwizard Maze, 2 French Ministry tactical officers disappeared after him. 3 seconds after that, 6 more. Chapter 6, Without chains. The graveyard smelled like old stone and dead grass. Harry hit the ground rolling and came up on his feet in a single motion, wand out, and the cup was still in his left hand and he let it go because it was done now, it had delivered him, and the cold metal of it clanged against a headstone as it fell. He knew where he was immediately. Not from memory, he'd never been here, but from the dreams. From the cold voice and the dark figure and the recurring specific quality of this darkness, this landscape, this arrangement of stone and sky and the particular Scottish adjacent cold of an English countryside night. The graveyard. He was standing between two headstones in a cemetery that went on for perhaps 50 meters in every direction, the village visible at the low hill's crest, the sky overhead black and moonless and heavy with cloud. The cup had landed somewhere behind him and wasn't glowing anymore. His wand was up and his breathing was steady and he was doing the thing, the immediate tactical inventory, what's here, what's moving, where's the threat? Movement to his left. 10 meters. A small, robed figure, carrying something. Wormtail. He was running the moment he saw Wormtail's face and he was fast, faster than he'd ever been in his life, the specific speed that came from a body finally moving without the exhaustive drag of 18 suppressions, and the spell he fired wasn't a stunner, it was a full body bind that came off his wand like water off a slope, clean and immediate, no hesitation, no friction. And Wormtail was on the ground before he'd taken his third step. The bundle Wormtail had been carrying fell. Harry stopped. He looked at the bundle. The bundle moved. Small. Bandaged wrapped, folded into itself, something faintly luminous at its edges. The thing inside it made a sound that was not a cry and not a breath but something between the two, a kind of existence noise, the sound of something barely alive insisting on continuing to be. Voldemort. The rudimentary body. The form between forms, the thing waiting for completion. Harry stood over it and felt, not fear, which he'd expected, but something colder and more specific. Recognition. The dreams had not lied about the quality of this, the way a very old darkness felt when you were close to it, the psychic weight of something that had been choosing cruelty for 60 years. He pointed his wand at the bundle. He held it there. He thought about the ritual. About blood magic and suppressed cores and how the plan had always been, Harry arrives here diminished, compromised, 29 curses pressing him down to a manageable, usable size. Harry's blood is taken. The compressed potential of a suppressed core interacts with the right in the specific way that makes Voldemort's return not just real but catastrophically empowered. He thought about how none of that was what was happening now. He thought about 18 removed curses and Isabeau's counter-architecture still scaffolding him and a magical core that had spent the last 3 weeks remembering what it was. He stood in the graveyard with his wand on Voldemort's temporary body and breathed. Then the air beside him split open. Not violently, a precise displacement, the specific pressure change of a port key arrival, and then 2 people in French ministry tactical robes were standing in the graveyard, wands drawn, both of them running immediate perimeter assessments with the focused efficiency of professionals. One of them, a woman with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of face that suggested she'd made difficult decisions before and expected to make more, looked at Harry, looked at the bound form of Wormtail on the ground, looked at the bundle, and looked back at Harry. "Potter," she said. Her English was accented and precise. "Tactical Officer Arnaud, French Ministry. You are under French sovereignty protection. Are you injured?" "No," he said. "Is the threat contained?" He looked at the bundle. "Mostly," he said. She nodded once, crisp and absolute, and her partner moved immediately to the graveyard's perimeter, wand sweeping, establishing a boundary. More arrivals, another pressure change, 2 more officers, then 3 seconds later 4 more. 6 French tactical officers spreading through the graveyard with the coordinated ease of people who trained for exactly this, taking positions at the edges, covering exits, 2 of them coming to Wormtail and moving him with professional efficiency to a secure hold. The officer in charge, Arnaud, came to stand beside Harry. "What is in the bundle?" she said. "Voldemort," Harry said. "A rudimentary body. He needs a ritual to complete his return, blood, bone, flesh. He can't perform it himself in this form. Wormtail was meant to perform it. Arnaud looked at the bundle. Her expression was that of a woman who had been briefed on a worst-case scenario and was now performing a real-time comparison of the briefing against the actual situation. He is contained in this form, she said. It wasn't a question. For now, Harry said. He's not powerless. Don't, he stopped, because the bundle had moved, a slow shifting, a repositioning, and then the thing inside it turned its not-quite face toward Harry with the deliberate quality of something orienting on a scent. The voice that came out of it was quiet. Conversational. The voice that had been speaking in Harry's dreams for months, recognizable the way very old specific fears were recognizable. Harry Potter, it said. You are here. How unexpected. Not really, Harry said. You should be. The voice paused, and in the pause Harry felt it, the quick assessment, the experienced dark wizard reading the magical signature of the person in front of him, comparing it to whatever intelligence had been gathered across months of planning and 14 years of preparation. The pause was longer than the beginning of the sentence suggested. You are not. Another pause. Something has changed. Quite a lot, actually, Harry said. The bundle was very still. What have they done to you? The voice said, and it was the first time Harry had heard Voldemort surprised. Not alarmed, not afraid, not yet, but surprised, the specific tone of a strategist encountering a variable that had been categorized as fixed. Nothing, Harry said. They undid what you had done. 18 of them, anyway. He kept his wand steady on the bundle. There were 29 in total. Clever architecture. Took a professional 3 weeks to work through safely. The silence from the bundle was very specific. Your plan required a suppressed core, Harry said. Blood magic of the type you designed works on a compressed potential, the interaction amplified by the suppression effect. You needed me small. You needed me diminished. He paused. You needed me to arrive here as what I've been for my entire life, and I'm not that anymore. The ritual does not require. I've had a Cursebreaker and a Vila Elder explain the architecture to me in considerable detail, Harry said. It requires exactly that. Without the suppression effect, the blood interaction is different. Less predictable. Significantly less guaranteed to produce the result you planned for. He looked at the bundle steadily. Which means your best option tonight was always for me not to arrive. And your second best option was for me to arrive as planned. You don't have a third option. The thing inside the bundle made no sound for a moment. Then it said, with the precise quiet of something that had survived a great deal and was recalibrating rather than defeated, you are 14 years old. Yeah, Harry said. And I've had a very educational few weeks. Arnaud, beside him, made a small sound that was not quite professional. They couldn't kill it. This was the complication that Marchetti had explained to Harry 3 days earlier, in a conversation he hadn't shared with the others because the others had enough to worry about. The Horcruxes, Harry hadn't known the word then, Marchetti had given it to him along with the theory in the weight of what it meant, the split soul, the hidden pieces, the reasons why a killing curse had bounced off an infant and why something called Voldemort had been alive in some form through death, through years of non-existence, through everything that should have ended it. You couldn't kill what was already not quite alive. Not in the conventional sense. Not here, not tonight, not with the tools available. What you could do was prevent the ritual. Contain the form. Deny the return. Harry kept his wand on the bundle and let Arnaud's team do their work, which was efficient and thorough and included a containment ward that Harry had never seen before, a French magical technique that settled around the bundle with a quiet thoroughness that made the not-quite body go very still inside it, the way cold water quieted things. The thing inside it spoke once more, in the silence. You cannot stop this permanently, it said. This is a delay. I know, Harry said. I'm 14, not naive. But delays matter. He looked at the bundle. Every delay matters. You will not always have French officers at your back. No, Harry agreed. But I will always have me. Silence. Then, very quietly, with the particular quality of something ancient and dangerous acknowledging a fact it had not anticipated, you are not what I made you. No, Harry said. I'm what you were afraid of. He lowered his wand when Arnaud's team indicated the containment was complete, and he turned away from the bundle and looked at the graveyard with its old stones and its dark sky and its smell of cold grass. Wormtail was in custody. Voldemort's rudimentary form was contained. The ritual had not happened. The return had not happened. This night, this specific catastrophic night that the whole year had been building toward, had not gone according to plan. He was alive. He was uninjured. He was standing in a graveyard with 18 curses less than he'd carried his whole life and 11 still remaining in a very long road ahead of him, and he was, this was what surprised him most, he was not exhausted by it. He was clear. He was sharp. He was the specific kind of tired that came from physical exertion rather than the bone-deep depletion of someone running at constant insufficient capacity. He looked up at the sky and there were no stars through the cloud cover. He thought, there will be other nights with stars. The portkey back was a ministry-provided emergency transport that Arnaud produced from her tactical kit, standard issue for international operations, she explained, designed for extraction, and Harry arrived back in the Hogwarts grounds at the edge of the maze to what was, in retrospect, the most chaotic scene he'd encountered since a basilisk. The stands had emptied. Students were everywhere, not panicked, not quite, but the specific crowd agitation of several hundred people who'd been watching a maze for 40 minutes and then had 12 people disappear including 2 champions and were trying to understand what was happening. The French contingent's abrupt departure had been observed. Dumbledore was in the middle of the grounds with staff spreading around him. Fudge was somewhere near the ministry table looking like a man whose evening had exceeded his worst projections. Sirius had apparently resumed his human form, because he was standing at the edge of the grounds in his own clothes looking at the spot where Harry reappeared with the expression of someone who had spent the last 40 minutes performing extraordinary restraint. The portkey deposited Harry and Arnaud and 3 of her officers with a controlled arrival, no stumbling. Arnaud's team didn't stumble, and Harry straightened his robes and looked at the scene. The crowd saw him and the noise changed. The agitated uncertain hum became something sharper. He didn't wait for someone to come to him. He crossed the grounds toward the judging table because that was where things would need to happen, and the crowd moved around him with the slightly involuntary quality of water around a stone. Dumbledore reached him first. He was quick. Old men who moved that fast had done it for decades, and he came with the warm expression fully deployed, the concerned headmaster arriving at the scene of a student's distress, one hand reaching out in the familiar gesture. Harry stopped. He didn't step back. He just stopped and looked at him, and Dumbledore's hand stayed where it was, extended, and the 3 meters between them stayed exactly 3 meters. Something moved across Dumbledore's face. The recalibration again, but larger this time. More visible. A man encountering the full extent of a change he'd been tracking in pieces and finding the total significantly larger than the sum of the parts. Harry, he said. Warm. Careful. Thank God. Are you? What happened? Where did? Voldemort, Harry said clearly, and the word landed in the surrounding noise like a stone in water, rippling outward through the crowd. The cup was a portkey. He had a plan. It didn't work. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. The French tactical team arrived and we contained the situation. Dumbledore's expression did several things in rapid succession that he was too skilled to fully reveal. The concerned warmth. The rapid assessment. The adjustment. The controlled response. The French team, he began. Exercised their authority under French sovereignty protection, Harry said. As they're entitled to. He paused. Wormtail, Peter Pettigrew, is in French ministry custody. He's alive. There's enough on him to clear Sirius. He said this last sentence with deliberate clarity, watching Dumbledore's face, and saw the micro-expression of someone receiving a piece of information they'd been managing the non-arrival of for years. Fudge had arrived at Dumbledore's shoulder, pale and sweating, looking between Harry and the French tactical officers with the expression of a man whose ministry had just had a catastrophic international incident on its grounds. "Potter," Fudge started. "Now, what exactly has, Minister Fudge," Harry said, and his voice was perfectly polite and absolutely level. "I imagine you'll want to speak with Tactical Officer Arnaud about the official record. She's thorough." He looked at the man. "I'm also going to need a formal statement on the Ministry's investigation into the curse work on my person. The 30-day window is," he glanced at Arnaud. 19 days remaining," she said. 19 days remaining, Harry confirmed. "I'd suggest the Ministry use them." Fudge opened his mouth. Closed it. The lime green bowler hat was slightly askew, which seemed appropriate. Harry left them there and walked toward Sirius. Sirius grabbed him. Not elegantly, both arms, properly, the way you grabbed someone you'd been afraid wouldn't come back, and Harry let himself be grabbed because it was serious and because 3 weeks of changed self-knowledge included the knowledge that this was allowed, that being held by someone who loved you was not weakness and never had been. "You absolute," Sirius pulled back to look at him. His eyes were very bright. "You planned to go to that graveyard." "Not exactly planned," Harry said. "You knew the cup was a portkey and you grabbed it anyway." "I knew the cup was a portkey and I grabbed it on different terms than they expected," Harry said. "That's meaningfully different." Sirius stared at him. Then he said, with the exhausted affection of a man who recognized the impulse even while deploring the execution, "James would have done exactly this." "You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true." He let go of Harry's shoulders but kept one hand briefly at the back of his neck, "The way you steadied someone you were glad was upright. It went okay." The real version of okay, not the Harry Potter version where okay means surviving with injuries. "Real version," Harry said. "The ritual didn't happen. Wormtail's in custody. The containment held." He paused. "He's still, Voldemort is still out there, in some form. The Horcruxes are still, I know," Sirius said. "We deal with that. We deal with it properly, with information and time and all of us working on it together." His expression was very certain. "Not alone. Not anymore." Harry nodded. Across the grounds, he could see Ron and Hermione making their way through the crowd, Ron's red hair visible, Hermione's expression the focused determination version of relief. Cedric Diggory was near the maze entrance, talking to his father, who had his hands on Cedric's face in the specific way of fathers checking that children were intact. Fleur, he found her almost immediately. She was standing at the edge of the stands, not running, not pushing through the crowd, standing still, which was how he always found her in a crowd, by the quality of her stillness, watching him across the grounds. He met her eyes. She tilted her head slightly, a small precise movement that meant well. He nodded. Something moved across her face. Not relief exactly, something larger than relief, something with more facets. She held his gaze for a moment, then crossed the grounds toward him in the unhurried way she did everything, which covered the distance quickly without appearing to rush. She stopped in front of him. Sirius had stepped back, because Sirius read situations correctly. 18 removed, she said. "And you went into that maze?" "Yes." "And came back?" "Yes." She looked at him. In the chaos of the grounds, with students and ministry officials and French tactical officers and a great deal of noise all happening around them, she looked at him with the full attention she'd been giving him for 3 weeks, the attention that was never anything other than completely real. "The conversation," she said. "I'm ready for it," he said. The corner of her mouth moved. "Not tonight," she said. "Why not tonight?" "Because tonight you have 19 things to deal with and 200 people watching and," she paused. "And because I want to have it properly. Not in the middle of an incident." "Fair," he said. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. She looked at him for another moment, and he looked back, and it was the specific quality of two people acknowledging something real without the ceremony of saying it yet, which had its own kind of completeness. Then Ron arrived, slightly breathless, and the moment became something else. The night was long. Statements were given. Arnaud's team documented everything with the thoroughness of an organization that had been preparing for this specific international case for 3 weeks and intended its records to be bulletproof. Fudge spent 4 hours in a meeting with Arnaud and her senior counterpart that he did not emerge from looking like a man whose position had been strengthened. Wormtail, in French ministry custody under a containment ward that Arnaud assured anyone who asked was not going to fail, was processed for transport to Paris where he would be formally interrogated under procedures that were, Arnaud noted with professional dryness, somewhat more rigorous than Azkaban without trial. Sirius stayed. He stood in Maxime's study at 1 a.m. with a cup of tea he was actually drinking and a warrant that Marchetti had drafted and Arnaud had countersigned that was, legally speaking, under the Accord's provisions, the equivalent of a formal exoneration notice. Harry watched his godfather read it. Watched him read it twice. It's not official until, Sirius started. It's official enough, Marchetti said. Under French law, which is the governing framework for anything under the Accord right now, this is sufficient. Britain will have to recognize it or contest it, and contesting it requires them to explain why they're contesting the release of a man who was imprisoned without trial. He paused. Which is a conversation they would very much like not to have publicly. Sirius set the paper down. Picked up his tea. Put it down. Pressed both palms flat on the table and breathed. 12 years, Hermione said quietly, and then looked like she hadn't meant to say it aloud. 12 years, Sirius said. He straightened up. Something in his posture had changed, some long-held tension, not the immediate fear or grief but the deeper thing, the structural exhaustion of a man who'd been carrying wrongful imprisonment like a second skin for over a decade, releasing, fractionally, at the edges. Right, he said. He looked around the room. At Marchetti. At Isabeau. At Fleur. At Harry. Right. What do we do next? It wasn't a question in the way questions usually were. It was the statement of someone who'd been in a defensive posture for years and had just switched modes. Tonight, Isabeau said, from her chair, with the authority of someone who'd been making sensible decisions in impossible situations for a very long time, everyone sleeps. The next problems can be addressed tomorrow. They will still be there tomorrow. They have been there for years and they will survive one night of rest. Nobody argued with her. This was probably wise. Harry did not entirely sleep. He lay in his four-poster in Gryffindor Tower and the sounds of the castle settled around him, Ron's breathing, the distant sounds of Hogwarts at night, the specific deep silence that the Scottish countryside produced after midnight, and he thought. Not anxiously. Not the grinding, circular thinking of someone overwhelmed. More the kind of thinking that happened when a situation had moved through its crisis point and was settling into something new that needed mapping. 11 curses remaining. The structural removals were done, those 7 were gone. What remained were the individual and ministry-flagged ones, none of them structural, none of them as deeply integrated. Marchetti had estimated they could complete the remainder within 3 weeks, more quickly now that the foundational work was done. Voldemort contained but not defeated. The Horcruxes existing somewhere. The long war not over, not resolved, just differently configured than it would have been if tonight had gone according to the original plan. Harry thought about this without the dread he'd expected to feel and found, instead, the clean sober recognition of someone who understood the road ahead was long and had chosen to walk it anyway. Dumbledore. This was the one he came back to, turned over, couldn't quite set down. He thought about the office with its silver instruments and the warmth that had been designed, partly, and the warmth that hadn't been, because he didn't think all of it was designed. He didn't think Dumbledore had spent 60 years being kind and wise as an elaborate performance. He thought something more uncomfortable and more true, that a man could genuinely love someone and still choose to diminish them. That the greater good was the most dangerous of all rationales because it let you do terrible things and feel them as sacrifice. That Dumbledore had believed in what he'd done, had believed Harry's best hope for survival, for the world's best hope, lay in controlling the situation precisely, managing the variables, keeping the chosen one small enough to guide. Harry thought about the fire with the wall around it. He thought about what Fleur had said, "I felt what someone has been doing to you, and I need you to understand that it was not small." It wasn't small. And it wasn't done. The Accords process would continue. The French ministry's formal documentation would eventually require British response. Hermione's discovery, subsection 4, the removal of authority, was sitting in the file that Colette Vidal was transmitting to Paris. The case was building, piece by piece, with the thoroughness of an organization that had been waiting for Britain to be held accountable and had finally found their standing to do it. Harry wasn't going to make any decisions about Dumbledore tonight. He'd said that to Sirius and he meant it. The man was complicated, genuinely, uncomplicatedly complicated, not a cartoon, not a simple villain, but a human being of great power and fundamental arrogance who had decided he knew best and had acted on that decision for 14 years without asking the person most affected. Harry would know what to do when he knew what he needed to know. He was getting there. He closed his eyes and thought about the graveyard. About standing over that bundle in the dark with his wand out and 18 curses removed and the specific quality of, what was the word, sufficiency. Of being enough. Of being exactly and entirely what the situation required. He fell asleep thinking about it, and he slept well. Morning came grey and cold and full of owls. The Prophet had run an early edition, Chaos at Triwizard Finale, French Forces ACT, Ministry in Crisis, which Hermione brought to breakfast with her lips pressed together in the expression she used when headlines were technically accurate but missing roughly 80% of the context. She ate her toast and read the full article, and Harry watched her process it and watched the moment when she put the paper down and looked at him with something that was more than the concerned efficiency of the last 3 weeks, something warmer and less organized. "You're okay," she said. Not a question. The statement of someone confirming a fact they'd been afraid of losing. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She picked up her toast again. Ron, across from her, was eating with the appetite of someone who'd spent a very tense evening and was making up for lost calories, and he looked at Harry once over his pumpkin juice and then looked away, which was Ron's version of "I'm glad you're here and I'm not going to make a thing of it." Harry ate his breakfast. He was actually hungry, which was its own new experience, the real appetite of a body that was running correctly, not the dutiful eating of someone who'd been told to eat. He had eggs and toast and fruit and a cup of tea and thought about the conversation he was supposed to have with Fleur. She was at the Beauxbatons table across the hall. She was in conversation with 2 of her classmates and eating her own breakfast with the composed efficiency that was simply how she existed, and she hadn't looked at Harry yet this morning, which was the kind of deliberate not looking that meant she was aware of exactly where he was. He looked at her for a moment and then looked at his plate and almost smiled. They met by the lake at 10. Not the bank, the small dock that extended out over the water on the eastern side, a Hogwarts feature that Harry had always known existed and never used, which was what made it good for this. Nobody else was there. The morning was cold and still, the lake silver under a pale sky, the Hogwarts grounds carrying the post-event quiet of somewhere that had been very busy the night before and was now exhaling. Fleur was already there when he arrived. She'd chosen the end of the dock and she was standing rather than sitting, which he was learning meant she was thinking about something she hadn't fully organized yet. He walked out to the end of the dock and stood beside her and they looked at the lake for a moment. "The conversation," he said. "The conversation," she confirmed. "You said you'd have it properly," he said. "No middle of an incident." "This is not the middle of an incident," she said. "This is the morning after." "Close enough." She looked at him sideways. "Close enough," she said. She turned to face him properly and he turned to face her and they were standing close in the way of the dock's limited width and the morning felt specific and real in the way that some mornings did. "When I first felt what was done to you," she said, "the full count, all 29, I told my grandmother immediately. I wrote the letter and sent the owl and I sat up all night. She paused. I told you it was because I found it. Because finding it was reason enough. Yes, he said. That was true, she said. But it wasn't the whole truth. He waited. The mate-blocking curses, she said. The specific type. I explained what they do, the general suppression, the isolation effect, the magical output interference. What I didn't explain was why the Accord considers them an act of war. What makes them different from other suppressive workings? Tell me now, he said. She met his eyes. They block something specific, she said. Not just connections in general. The mate bond is not, it is not a fairy tale, Harry. It is a real magical phenomenon, more common in some bloodlines than others, documented and categorized and experienced by a significant number of magical people who are not Vila. She paused. What it is, functionally, is the recognition by one magical core of another as complementary. As belonging together in a specific way that strengthens both. She held his gaze. These curses don't block you from loving people. They block that specific recognition. The one that says this person. He looked at her. When I touched your hand in that tent, she said, I felt 29 suppressions. But I also felt what they were suppressing. The specific bond they were blocking. She was very still. I felt the other end of it. The dock was very quiet. The lake moved slightly beneath them, cold water against weathered wood. You felt, he stopped. My grandmother confirmed it, Fleur said. She said it was possible she'd never seen a clearer natural bond signature in her life, which from my grandmother is, she stopped. Chose the English words. Significant. That is significant. So he was doing the accounting, running the numbers, feeling the specific shape of something he didn't entirely have words for yet. You knew. From the tent. From that first moment. I suspected, she said carefully. I confirmed it over the following weeks, as the curses came down. Each removal, each session, the bond resonance became more legible. More clear. She paused. I did not tell you immediately because I had enough to deal with, he said. Because, she said, and her voice was very precise, I did not want this to be something that happened to you rather than something you chose. The curse removal, the French ministry, all of it, so much of it was things that needed to be done whether you wanted them or not. This, she stopped. Breathed. This is different. This is not the Accord. This is not my grandmother or the ministry or the treaty. This is just, she looked at him. This is just us. Harry looked at Fleur Delacour in the morning light on the end of the dock, with the lake grey and silver behind her and her platinum hair loose and the composed, direct expression that was entirely her own, and he thought about 3 weeks of her being present without being asked, of her sitting on the bank and asking him to be honest, of the careful quality of her attention, of idiot said in completely the wrong voice for the word. He thought about 18 curses removed and the specific sensation of each absence. He thought about the thing Isabeau had said when the structural ones came down, you are not what I made you. I'm still 11 curses away from being fully, he started. I know, she said. That is not, she stopped. Looked at him with the directness that was her most consistent quality, the refusal to manage the situation into something easier. I am not asking you for anything tonight or tomorrow. I am not asking you to decide anything. I am telling you something that is true and that I thought you deserved to know. She paused. I have spent 3 weeks watching someone find out who they actually are. And whoever that is, she looked at him. I find I am very interested in knowing him. He held her gaze. I find, he said carefully, that I'm very interested in finding out. Something in her expression shifted. The thing she kept controlled, the thing underneath the composure, it came through fully, cleanly, without performance. Just the real version, the one that had been there since the tent, the one she'd been carrying controlled and professional through 3 weeks of crisis and extraction and politics. Warmth. Specifically his. Good, she said, and it was the word he'd been using for 3 weeks, and she said it his way, flat and simple and entirely meaning it. He almost laughed. He let himself, quietly, and she let herself hear it, and the morning held them both in the easy unself-consciousness of two people who just said a hard true thing and had it land correctly. 3 days later, Dumbledore called Harry to his office. Harry went, and sat in the familiar chair, and looked at the familiar room, and felt the familiar warmth offered across the desk, and this time he had 16 curses removed and Hermione's document and Marchetti's analysis and his godfather's freedom in process and a specific bone knowledge of who he was, and he looked at Dumbledore and waited. Harry, Dumbledore said. The voice was exactly as it had always been. There are things we need to discuss. Yes, Harry said. There are. Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, the fracture, wider now, the composure of a man who'd expected a manageable conversation and was receiving confirmation that this was not that. The French ministry's actions have been, he began. Legal, Harry said. Fully legal, under the Accord de Lyon. I've read it. He paused. Article 7, all subsections. Silence. Harry, the voice was still warm. Still the voice of the most revered man in Wizarding Britain. I want you to know that everything I ever did was because I believed it was necessary, Harry said. The word came out very clean. Dumbledore stopped. I know you believe that, Harry said. He kept his voice level, not cold, not angry, just direct. I believe that you believed it. And I'm not. He looked at the long fingers folded on the desk, the blue eyes behind the half-moon glasses, the face of someone who'd had enormous power and used it according to his own conception of what was best for the world. I'm not going to pretend it was simple. What you are is very complicated. What you did was not complicated. What you did was wrong. He held the man's gaze. And it's going to be addressed. Not by me, not personally. That's the Accord's process and the Ministry's process, and it will happen with or without my involvement. But I need you to know that I know. Not as an allegation. As a fact. Dumbledore was very still. I'm not going to leave Hogwarts, Harry said. I'm going to finish this year. I'm going to continue being your student, and I'm going to be civil, and I'm not, he paused. I'm not making this a war between us. That's not what this is. He looked at the headmaster. But the plan, whatever plan required me to be what I was for 14 years, that plan is over. I'm not going to be small and manageable and predictable so that someone else's strategy works out. Not yours, not Voldemort's, not anyone's. He said it without heat and without apology and without the reflexive anxiety of someone waiting for a response, and the saying of it was the most powerful thing he'd done in a very long eventful 3 weeks. Dumbledore sat with it. His face did several careful things. When he spoke, his voice was still controlled, but there was something in it that Harry had never heard there before, something that might have been remorse and might have been the kind of reckoning that very old powerful people experienced when the world declined to arrange itself around their certainties anymore. I have, Dumbledore said quietly, made decisions in your name that were not mine to make. Yes, Harry said simply. I cannot, he stopped. Pressed his fingertips together. I cannot fully explain them in a way that will satisfy you, and I understand that. I am not certain they can be explained. Another pause. I will cooperate with the Accord's process. Harry nodded. He stood. One more thing, he said. He looked at Fawkes, who was watching him from the perch with those bright eyes and that quality of deep, uncomplicated seeing. Sirius Black is innocent. You knew that. You've known it for years. He looked back at Dumbledore. Whatever you did to manage that situation, with Remus, with the Ministry, with the way Sirius was treated, that also needs to be right. He left the office and walked down the spiral staircase and stood in the corridor and felt the absence of 16 curses and the presence of 11 remaining and the specific quality of forward motion that had been growing in him for 3 weeks. He felt, with particular clarity, that he was going to be okay. Not today, not all at once. There were horcruxes to find and a war coming and a process to complete and 11 suppressions still pressing, and none of that was small. But the difference between doing all of that as himself and doing it as the diminished version, that difference was everything. That difference was the difference between a candle and a sun. He walked down the corridor and the castle moved around him and outside, somewhere, Sirius was probably arguing with French solicitors about the exact timeline of his exoneration and Hermione was probably reading something and Ron was probably eating something and Fleur was probably standing in some cold part of the grounds thinking with the focused stillness that he was getting to know. He went to find her. The 11 remaining curses came down over the following 3 weeks. Not dramatically, not with the ceremony the first removals had carried, not with the shock of discovery or the weight of specific names on Marchetti's board, because those had already been found and the architecture had already been mapped and what remained was work. Careful, patient, professional work, Isabeau and Marchetti moving through the remaining workings with the systematic efficiency of people finishing a job they'd started. Each one left its absence. By the end of it Harry had 29 absences, 29 places where something had pressed and now nothing did, and the sum of them was not a void but the opposite, the full resonance of a magical core operating without interference for the first time in his memory, which was strange and right and occasionally startling in the way that correct things sometimes were when you'd been used to wrong ones. The last curse, one of the crude ministry-placed ones from his second year, came down on a Tuesday evening in May, in Maxime's study, and when it was done Marchetti sat back and looked at his hands and then at Harry and said simply, "That's all of them." Harry sat with that. Isabeau closed her record book. Fleur, from the chair by the window, looked at him with the full version of the expression that had been building since November. Sirius, in the corner, raised his cup of tea in a small, precise gesture. "How do you feel?" Isabeau asked, for the last time. Harry thought about it. He reached inward with the magical sense that had been developing, unobstructed, for weeks now, and felt, himself. The full unaltered resonance of his own magical core, clear and complete, like a note held steady in a room with good acoustics. "Like myself," he said. Isabeau nodded once, with satisfaction. "Good," she said. The formal French ministry investigation concluded in June. Cornelius Fudge resigned before the findings were published, citing health reasons, which fooled no one. The ministry official from the Department of Mysteries who'd authorized the first curse was prosecuted under the Accord's provisions. The file on Dumbledore, names, signatures, dated workings, full documentation, was placed in the formal record of the French Ministry of Magic and transmitted to the International Confederation of Wizards. Dumbledore was not removed from Hogwarts immediately. The process was slower than that, more complicated, involving negotiation between the British Ministry and the Confederation and the Accord's oversight body, and Harry didn't push for speed because he'd meant what he said about not making it a war. But the process was moving. It was real and it was moving and it would arrive where it was going to arrive without requiring Harry to be the one who drove it there. Sirius Black was formally exonerated in May, 3 weeks after Wormtail's testimony was taken under Veritasium in Paris and transmitted to the British Ministry in a document that the British Ministry's lawyers spent 4 days examining and found no grounds to contest. He cried. Not for long, not loudly. Sirius Black was not a man who cried easily, but Harry was in the room when the official confirmation arrived, and he saw it, and he didn't say anything about it because some things didn't need commentary. What he did was hand Sirius a cup of tea, which Sirius took and held with both hands. "Free," Sirius said. "Free," Harry agreed. The conversation about the Horcruxes was had in May, in the small parlor of Sirius's newly returned property at Grimmauld Place, the house reclaimed as part of the exoneration, dark and in need of work, but real and his, with Harry and Sirius and Hermione and Ron and Remus, who had come back from abroad at Sirius's summons and sat in the corner chair listening with his grey-threaded face quiet and sharp. Harry presented what he knew. Marchetti's analysis. The blood magic architecture. The fact of Voldemort's continued existence in some form, the containment France had established, the certainty that the containment was temporary. He presented it clearly, completely, without making himself smaller than the information required. When he was done, Remus looked at him for a long moment with eyes that were doing the same thing Dumbledore's had done in the office, recalibrating against an expected version of Harry Potter and finding the actual version significantly larger, except Remus's recalibration landed with relief rather than concern. The Horcruxes, Remus said. Finding them will require research first, Hermione said, and had a list of starting points ready before she'd finished the sentence. Magical capability to destroy them, Harry said. I'd like to understand the requirements before we start looking. There are methods, Remus said. A few. He looked at Harry steadily. You've been doing your own research. Yes. What did you find? Basilisk venom, Harry said. Fiend fire. A few others that are less practical. And, he paused, thinking about Marchetti's notes on soul bond resonance and the way certain combined magical forces interacted with dark objects. And possibly something that Marchetti and Isabeau are still theorizing. Based on what my core resonance looks like now. Remus went very still in the specific way of someone encountering an idea that was alarming and potentially brilliant. Describe that, he said. Harry described it. The room was quiet for a while. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione was already writing. Right, Sirius said. So we have a theory, a methodology to develop, and several years of dark object hunting ahead of us. Roughly, Harry said. Could be worse, Ron said. How? Hermione asked, genuinely. Ron considered. It could be raining, he said. Fleur went back to France at the end of the school year with Beau's batons, which was the practical reality of two people in two schools in two countries, and Harry stood in the Hogwarts grounds on the morning the Beau's batons carriage lifted off and watched it go. She'd said goodbye the night before, properly, not in front of anyone. They'd been on the battlements, their battlements, he'd started thinking of them, which was either a 14-year-old sentimentality or the accurate description of a place where several important things had been decided. She'd told him the bond, without suppressions in the way, would be something he felt now. Not dramatically, not like a constant noise. More like weather, present and variable, the specific quality of awareness of another person's emotional truth at a distance. He'd asked if that was uncomfortable. She'd said, get used to it. He'd said, bossy. She'd looked at him for a moment with the full honest expression, the real one, and then she'd put her hand on his jaw and kissed him once, precisely, in the way she did everything, completely and without apology and with the quality of someone who had chosen and was not uncertain about the choice. He'd felt it in his chest and also in his core and also in the specific deep place that had been pressed on for 14 years and was now, finally, open. She'd pulled back and looked at him and the expression was warm in the specific way that was his. Right, she said. Every week, he said. More than once a week, she said. Every day is excessive, he said. I didn't say every day, she said. Twice a week, minimum. Negotiated, he said. She'd gone. Standing in the grounds watching the carriage lift into the Scottish sky, Harry felt her direction, south and east, toward the Channel, toward France, like a compass finding north, a natural orientation that he understood was going to be a feature of things now, this awareness, and he wasn't afraid of it or overwhelmed by it. He was simply aware. The carriage became a point and then was gone. He turned back toward the castle, toward the summer ahead, toward the work of finding Horcruxes and building alliances and continuing the slow complicated process of holding a man he still had complex feelings about accountable for complex wrongs, toward the war that was coming in some form regardless of how last November had gone, toward all of it. He walked back through the castle doors without hesitation. He was 15 years old and 29 curses removed and himself, properly and entirely himself, and the road ahead was long and real and full of things that wanted to kill him. He was, he thought, going to be fine with that. He was going to be, at last, genuinely fine with that. Enfin.